A woman steps off a train to marry a dead man, 7 orphan children, a crumbling cabin on the edge of nowhere, and men with red-sealed papers coming to take it all away. This is the story of Mara Dwyer, a widow who never had a husband, a mother who never gave birth, and a fighter who refused to let the prairie swallow the innocent whole. Stay with me until the end and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Mara's story travels across this world. The spring of 1887 came to Nebraska territory like a whisper wrapped in dust. Gentle at first, then all-consuming. The train that carried Mara Dwyer westward had rumbled for 3 days across landscapes that grew progressively emptier, as if civilization itself was being peeled away layer by layer until only the raw skeleton of America remained. Through the soot-stained window, she watched forests give way to farms, farms to grassland, and grassland to something that had no name except absence. She was 26 years old, and everything she owned fit into 2 leather trunks strapped to the baggage car. In her cloth satchel, pressed between a Bible and a daguerreotype of her mother, was the letter that had changed her life. She had read it so many times the creases threatened to split the paper into fragments. Dear Miss Dwyer, I am a widower with land and children in need of a mother's hand. I am not a romantic man, but I am honest and hardworking. If you can find it in your heart to journey west, I promise you a home, respect, and a partnership built on mutual need, and God willing, eventual affection. Yours in hope, Silas Hale. The letter had arrived at the Philadelphia boarding house where Mara worked 16-hour days scrubbing floors and changing linens for women who looked through her as if she were made of glass. Her own family was gone, mother to consumption, father to drink and despair shortly after. She had no prospects, no suitors who saw past her red raw hands and the exhaustion that aged her beyond her years. When Mrs. Carmichael, the boarding house proprietor, had found her reading the letter by candlelight, the old woman had snorted, "A mail order bride? You'll end up murdered in a ditch, mark my words." But Mara had looked at that letter and seen not danger but possibility. A home. Children who needed her. A man who valued honesty over poetry. She had written back that very night, and 3 weeks later a second letter arrived with train fare and a date. April 15th, Ash Hollow Station. Now, as the conductor called out, Ash Hollow Station," in a voice that suggested this was the very edge of the known world, Mara's hands trembled as she gathered her belongings. Through the window, she could see the station, a weathered wooden platform, a single building that might have been a telegraph office or a feed store, and beyond it, nothing but rolling prairie grass that moved like ocean waves under the relentless wind. The train lurched to a stop with a shriek of brakes that sent cinders flying. Mara stood, straightened her traveling dress, navy blue, her best, though it had seen better days, and pinned her hat more firmly to her dark hair. Her reflection in the window glass showed a pale, angular face with gray eyes that had learned not to expect much. She looked like what she was, a woman running out of options, hoping the West might be kinder than the East had been. The conductor, a thick-necked man with tobacco-stained whiskers, helped her down the steps. "Someone meeting you, miss?" "Yes," Mara said, though suddenly she wasn't sure. "A Mr. Silas Hale." The conductor's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing, just signaled to the baggage handler to unload her trunks. They hit the platform with heavy thuds that seemed too loud in the vast emptiness. Around her, 3 other passengers disembarked, a traveling salesman with a sample case and an elderly couple who were immediately swept into the arms of waiting family. Mara stood alone, scanning the platform. There were perhaps a dozen people visible, locals by the look of them, weathered and practical in their homespun clothes. But no one approached her. No tall rancher with work-roughened hands and kind eyes. No one at all. The train's whistle screamed and the conductor called, "Board!" to the salesman who had concluded his business with impressive speed. The old couple and their family were already heading toward a wagon. The platform was emptying. Mara's heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat in her chest. She turned in a circle, searching. Had she gotten the date wrong? The station? But no, the letter had been clear. April 15th, Ash Hollow Station, Nebraska Territory. "Ma'am?" The voice was small, young. Mara spun and looked down. A boy stood 3 feet away, perhaps 10 years old, skin burned brown by the sun, hair the color of wheat left too long in the field. He wore trousers held up with rope, a shirt that had been patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible, and no shoes despite the early spring chill. His feet were calloused and dirty, and his blue eyes held something that made Mara's throat tighten, a kind of ancient exhaustion that no child should ever carry. Are you Miss Mara Dwyer?" he asked. "I am," she said, kneeling so she could meet his eyes. "And you are?" Caleb Hale." He swallowed hard. "Silas Hale's my paw." Relief flooded through her. "Oh, thank goodness. I was beginning to worry. He's dead." The words hit her like a physical blow. Mara rocked back on her heels, her hand instinctively reaching for something to steady herself, finding only air. "What?" "Paw's dead. Snake got him 3 days back. Copperhead, hiding in the woodpile." Caleb's voice was flat, matter-of-fact, as if he were reciting a lesson. "Bit him on the hand. He lasted about 6 hours. We buried him ourselves, me and Uncle Gideon. Well, Uncle Gideon did most of it. I helped." Behind them, the train's wheels began to turn. Mara heard the mechanical clanking, felt the vibration through the platform boards, but she couldn't move, couldn't think. The man she had traveled 3 days to marry was dead. Dead and buried before she'd even arrived. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, though the words felt absurdly inadequate. Caleb shrugged with a practiced indifference that broke her heart. "Ain't your fault. Snakes don't ask permission." The train was picking up speed now, pulling away from the station with a mournful whistle. Mara watched it go, watched her last connection to Philadelphia, and everything familiar disappear into the prairie vastness. She was stranded here, in a place called Ash Hollow, with a dead fiancé and a barefoot orphan boy who looked at her with eyes that expected nothing and hoped for less. She stopped, unsure what to say, what to do. She had 53 cents in her purse. No return ticket, no plan beyond marry Silas Hale and help raise his children. "We got 6 more back home," Caleb said, as if reading her thoughts. "And a baby. Ada's just 8 months. 7 children. 7 orphans, if what this boy said was true." Mara felt the weight of it settle over her like a physical thing. "Your mother?" she asked gently. "Dead 2 years. Fever took her." Caleb kicked at a loose board with his bare foot. "That's why Pa wrote to you. He tried to manage alone, but..." The boy trailed off, and Mara saw his jaw tighten. "Anyway, don't matter now. You'll want to get back on the next train east, I reckon. They run twice a week." Mara looked at this child, this small, fierce, wounded child, and felt something shift inside her. She thought of her own childhood, of her mother working herself to death, of her father's descent into the bottle after his wife was gone. She thought of what it meant to be alone, truly alone, at 10 years old with 6 younger siblings depending on you. "How far is your home?" she asked. Caleb's eyes widened slightly. "About 8 miles northeast. Why?" "Because," Mara said, rising to her feet and brushing dust from her skirt, "you're going to take me there." "But you don't want to. I mean, there ain't nothing for you there. Pa's dead." "You said there are 6 more children and a baby. That sounds like something to me." She pointed at her trunks. "Can you manage one of those? I'll take the other." Caleb stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're coming? To the house? Unless you'd rather I didn't." "No, I mean, are you sure? We ain't." He struggled for words, and Mara saw tears threatening at the corners of his eyes, though he blinked them back fiercely. "I'm sure," she said, and realized as she spoke that she meant it. She had come here for a purpose, to be needed, to have a home, to matter to someone. That purpose hadn't died with Silas Hale. If anything, it had become more urgent. "Now, how do we get these trunks to your house? Is there a wagon?" "Wagon's broke. Axle split last month and we ain't had money to fix it." Caleb looked at the trunks doubtfully. "We could try to carry them, but it's a far piece." "Then we'll see if someone at the station can help. Wait here." Mara walked toward the station building, her mind racing. She had no idea what she was doing, no plan beyond the next few hours. But she felt more certain of this decision than she had of anything in years. She pushed open the door to find a telegraph office, as she'd suspected, manned by a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. "Excuse me," she said. "I need to get to the Hale place about 8 miles northeast. Is there anyone who might provide transportation for hire?" The telegraph operator looked up, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to something like pity. "You're the bride?" Word traveled fast in small places, apparently. I was. "Heard about Silas. Terrible thing. Copperheads are vicious this time of year." He tapped his pen against the counter thoughtfully. "Ben Morrison runs freight between here and the outlying farms. He's probably at the saloon, but he might take you for $1. "Thank you." Mara turned to go, then paused. "The children, are they all right? Has anyone been checking on them?" The operator shifted uncomfortably. "Well, Gideon's out there, Silas's brother. He'll see they don't starve, I reckon." "You reckon?" Mara heard the steel in her own voice. 7 children lost their father 3 days ago, and the town reckons someone might make sure they don't starve? "Now see here, Miss." "Mrs. Hale," Mara interrupted, surprising herself. "And I'll be seeing to those children myself. Good day." She left before he could respond, her face burning. She had no right to that name, no legal claim to it, but saying it had felt like drawing a line in the dust. Here is where I stand. The saloon was easy to find. It was the only building with noise coming from it. Mara pushed through the door into a dim room that smelled of whiskey and unwashed men. Conversation stopped abruptly as every head turned toward her. She was painfully aware that respectable women didn't enter saloons, but she was past caring about respectability. "I'm looking for Ben Morrison," she said clearly. A burly man with a gray-streaked beard stood from a corner table. "That'd be me, and you'd be the mail-order bride." "I need transportation to the Hale place. The telegraph operator said you might help." Morrison exchanged glances with the other men, and Mara saw something pass between them. Knowledge, pity, perhaps a bit of shame. "Heard about Silas," Morrison said. "Heard you came all the way from back east. That's a hard thing, miss, arriving to find your intended already in the ground. Can you help me or not? I can pay." "Keep your money," Morrison said, draining his glass and standing. "I'll take you. It's the least this town can do, considering we let those kids sit out there alone for 3 days. The other men had the grace to look uncomfortable. One muttered, "Gideon's with them." "Gideon's drunk half the time and angry the other half," Morrison said bluntly. He and Silas hadn't spoken in years before this. "Can't expect him to suddenly turn nursemaid." He gestured toward the door. "Come on, miss. Let's get you out there before dark." The ride to the Hale place was the longest 8 miles of Mara's life. Morrison's freight wagon was built for durability, not comfort, and every rut in the primitive road sent jolts through her spine. Caleb sat between them, silent and tense, while Mara's trunks rattled in the back. The landscape was hypnotic in its sameness. Rolling prairie, patches of scrub oak, the occasional creek bed marked by a line of cottonwoods. The sky was impossibly large, a vast dome of blue that made Mara feel small and exposed. She had never known such emptiness. Even the poorest parts of Philadelphia had been full of people, full of buildings, full of noise and life. This land was full only of itself. "How long had Mr. Hale been alone with the children?" she asked Morrison after a long silence. 2 years since Ruth died. She was a good woman, Ruth. Worked herself to death, if you ask me. 7 babies in 11 years, that's too much for any woman's body to bear. Morrison kept his eyes on the rutted track. Silas did his best, but a man can't be both father and mother. The older kids helped, but it was hard, real hard. "What about neighbors? Surely someone—" "Nearest neighbor is the Johnsons, about 4 miles south. They've got their own troubles. 6 kids of their own and barely scraping by. Folks out here help when they can, but everyone's stretched thin." Morrison glanced at her. "You thinking of staying?" "I don't know what I'm thinking," Mara admitted. "I just know I can't leave until I've at least seen them." "Fair enough." Morrison was quiet for a moment, then said, "You should know, Gideon, Silas's brother, he's a complicated man. He and Silas had a falling out years back. Something about the land, the inheritance." Gideon took off, and they didn't speak for near about 8 years. He showed up the day Silas died, like he knew somehow. "Is he dangerous?" "Dangerous? Nah. Broken? Maybe. Angry at the world, but he wouldn't hurt kids. Morrison paused. Can't say he's any good at taking care of them, though. They crested a low ridge, and Morrison pointed. There. Mara followed his gesture and felt her heart sink. The Hale cabin sat in a shallow valley, backed by a ridge of limestone that glowed gold in the afternoon sun. It might have been picturesque if it weren't so obviously on the edge of collapse. The cabin itself leaned slightly to one side, its roof patched with mismatched boards. A chimney made of river rock jutted crookedly from one end. The yard was bare dirt, scattered with the debris of hardship, a broken wagon wheel, rusted tools, a woodpile that was more scattered than stacked. Behind the cabin was a barn in even worse condition, and beyond that, fields that should have been plowed and planted but lay fallow. A few scrawny chickens pecked in the dirt. There was no sign of livestock, no dog barking a welcome, no smoke from the chimney despite the chill in the air. Home sweet home, Caleb said quietly, and Mara heard the shame in his voice. As Morrison guided the wagon down into the valley, the cabin door opened and children began to emerge. First came a girl of perhaps 12, thin as a rail with tangled brown hair and a baby on her hip. Then 2 more girls, maybe 8 and 6, their dresses too short and patched beyond repair. A boy of 4 or 5 clutched the older girl's skirt. Behind them, a boy of about 7 watched with wary eyes. They stood in a cluster, these children, and Mara saw in their faces all the losses they had endured: mother, father, security, hope. They looked like small ghosts, haunting a home that had forgotten how to be one. Morrison pulled the wagon to a stop and helped Mara down. Her legs were shaky after the long ride, but she steadied herself and approached the children slowly, as one might approach wild creatures who had learned not to trust. "Hello," she said gently. "My name is Mara Dwyer. I came because your father wrote to me." The oldest girl shifted the baby to her other hip. Up close, Mara could see that the child's eyes were huge and solemn, and her tiny body was too light for 8 months old. Underfed, clearly. The girl herself looked exhausted beyond measure. "I'm Sarah," she said in a voice that was carefully controlled. "This is Ada. The others are Lily, Beth, Matthew, and Thomas." She pointed to each child in turn. "You met Caleb. He found me at the station. I'm so very sorry about your father." Sarah's face remained impassive. "Caleb said you'd probably go back east." "I'm not going back. Not today, at least. I thought I might stay and help, if you'll have me." The children exchanged glances, as if this were some kind of trick question. Finally, Beth, the 6-year-old, spoke in a small voice. "Are you going to be our new mama?" "Beth," Sarah hissed, but Mara held up a hand. "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't think you can replace a mama. But I can be a friend. Someone who takes care of you. Would that be all right?" Beth nodded slowly, and Mara saw the faintest flicker of hope in her eyes. It was almost painful to witness. Morrison cleared his throat. "I'll unload your trunks, miss. Shall I put them inside?" "Please. Thank you, Mr. Morrison." As Morrison wrestled her trunks from the wagon, Mara turned back to the children. "Is there an adult here?" Caleb mentioned an uncle. "Uncle Gideon's out back," Sarah said. He's digging." "Digging?" "The garden plot. Pa never got it turned this year, and Uncle Gideon says if we don't plant soon, we won't eat come fall." Sarah's voice was clinical, factual, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She understood exactly how precarious their situation was. "I see. Well, I should introduce myself to him. Sarah, would you show me where he is?" Sarah nodded and handed the baby to Lily, who took Ada with practiced ease despite being only 8 years old. Mara followed Sarah around the side of the cabin, past what had once been a kitchen garden, but was now just weeds and dead stalks from last year. Behind the cabin, a man was working a spade into the hard earth with a kind of focused violence. He was perhaps 40, tall and rangy, with dark hair shot through with silver. His shirt was off despite the cool air, and his back was corded with muscle and scars. He didn't look up as they approached. "Uncle Gideon," Sarah called. "Someone's here." He stabbed the spade into the ground and straightened, turning to face them. His face was all hard angles and suspicion, with the same blue eyes as Caleb, but harder, older, full of things seen and survived. He looked at Mara with an expression that was neither welcoming nor hostile, just assessing. "You're the mail-order bride," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Mara Dwyer. And you're Gideon Hale." "I am." He wiped his hands on his trousers, though they stayed dirty. "My condolences on your loss." The words were formal, almost mocking. Mara bristled but kept her voice level. "I never met your brother, Mr. Hale, so I can't claim to have lost him, but these children have, and that's what matters." Something flickered in Gideon's eyes, surprise perhaps, or respect. "Fair enough. What are you doing here?" "I came to marry your brother. Since that's no longer possible, I thought I'd see if I could be of use." "Use?" Gideon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, these kids need more than someone who's useful. They need food, clothes, medicine, and a miracle. You got any of those in those fancy trunks?" "No," Mara said evenly, "but I have a strong back, 2 hands, and more stubbornness than sense. That will have to do." They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Gideon nodded slowly. "All right then. Sarah, show Miss Dwyer inside. Get her settled. I've got another hour of light to work with." He turned back to his digging, then paused and added without looking at them, "There's beans soaking in the pot. Someone should start a fire and cook them before the little ones start gnawing on the furniture." It was, Mara realized, both a dismissal and a kind of acceptance. Inside, the cabin was worse than she'd feared. It was a single large room with a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. The floor was dirt, packed hard over the years, but still dirt. There was a stone fireplace with a crane for cooking, a rough-hewn table with benches, and several pallets scattered around the walls for sleeping. Possessions were minimal, a few blankets, some dishes, a shelf of supplies that was mostly empty. The windows were oiled paper, not glass, and torn in several places. But what struck Mara most was the smell. Not filth exactly, but the smell of grief. Stale air, unwashed bodies, hopelessness given physical form. The children had been surviving, but barely. Morrison set her trunks down by the door. "Well, miss, I'll be heading back before dark. You sure about this?" "I'm sure," Mara said, though she wasn't sure of anything except that she couldn't leave these children. "All right then. God bless you." He tipped his hat and left, and Mara heard his wagon rattling away up the track. She turned to find all 6 children watching her, waiting. Even Ada, balanced on Lily's hip, stared at her with solemn eyes. The silence stretched, heavy with expectation and fear. Mara took a breath and rolled up her sleeves. "All right," she said briskly. "First things first. Sarah, show me where you keep the firewood. Caleb, those beans need to be cooked. Do you know how to build a fire? Beth and Matthew, I need you to find me a bucket and show me where the well is. Lily, you're doing fine with the baby. Just keep her happy. Thomas, would you help me move one of my trunks closer to the fireplace?" For a moment, no one moved. Then Caleb stepped forward. "You really staying? For tonight, at least?" "For tonight, at least," Mara confirmed. "Now let's get moving. Those beans won't cook themselves, and I don't know about you, but I'm hungry enough to eat a horse." Thomas, the 7-year-old, giggled at that, a rusty sound, as if he'd almost forgotten how. And suddenly the children were in motion, each moving to their assigned task. The cabin filled with purposeful activity, and Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years: necessary. She helped Caleb build a fire in the fireplace, showing him how to arrange the kindling for maximum airflow. While the flames caught, she examined the beans. They were old, probably the last of the winter stores, but they'd do. She added the salted pork she found hanging from the rafters, cutting it into small chunks with a knife that desperately needed sharpening. Beth and Matthew returned with a bucket of water, and Mara used some of it to wash her hands and face, then set the rest to heating for the beans. Sarah found a few withered potatoes in a barrel, and Mara added those to the pot as well. It wouldn't be much of a meal, but it would be hot and filling. As the food cooked, she took stock of her surroundings more carefully. The sleeping arrangements were clearly a disaster. The children had been piling together on the few pallets, sharing threadbare blankets that weren't enough to keep them warm. Mara made mental notes. More blankets, better bedding, a proper washing day, new clothes, a dozen other necessities that seemed overwhelming in their urgency. But first, feed them, warm them. Let them see that someone was taking charge. that they didn't have to carry everything alone. The sun was setting when Gideon finally came inside, drawn by the smell of cooking food. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene, the fire crackling, the children gathered around it, Mara stirring the pot with a focus that suggested this simple act mattered more than gold. "Smells good," he said quietly. "It's ready," Mara replied. "Children, find your bowls." They ate in near silence, the children too focused on the food to talk. Mara watched them, noticing who ate quickly and who savored each bite, who ensured the younger ones got enough, who hoarded their portion as if afraid it might be their last. By the time they finished, it was full dark outside, and the temperature was dropping fast. "All right," Mara said, collecting the bowls. "Before bed, everyone needs to wash their face and hands. We'll do better in the morning, but for tonight, this will do. Sarah, help me heat more water?" As Sarah brought the bucket to the fire, Mara noticed the girl's hands, rough, chapped, the hands of someone who'd been doing a woman's work for far too long. She was 12 years old and looked 30 in the eyes. "You've been taking care of them," Mara said quietly. "Your father's death, and before that too." "Someone had to." Sarah's voice was flat, but Mara heard the grief underneath. "You've done well, but you don't have to do it alone anymore." Mara touched the girl's shoulder gently. "I'm here now." Sarah looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe this promise. Then, abruptly, she burst into tears, huge gasping sobs that shook her thin frame. Mara pulled her close, letting the girl cry against her shoulder while the other children watched with wide eyes. "It's all right," Mara murmured. "You've been so strong, Sarah. So very strong. But you can rest now. I've got you." It was perhaps 10 minutes before Sarah's sobs quieted to hiccups, then to shuddering breaths. She pulled away, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Never apologize for tears," Mara said firmly. "Now, let's get everyone ready for bed." They managed the washing, and Mara tucked the younger children onto their pallets, surprised by how readily they accepted her care. Even Thomas, who had watched her with suspicion all evening, let her tuck his blanket around him. Ada fell asleep in Lily's arms before they even lay down. Caleb climbed up to the loft with Matthew, and Sarah followed after giving Mara one last, searching look. Gideon had disappeared outside again, which seemed to be his preferred location. Alone in the dark cabin with only the fire's glow for light, Mara sat on one of her trunks and let herself fully comprehend what she'd done. She was here, in a falling-down cabin on the Nebraska frontier, with 7 orphan children and no plan beyond tomorrow. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt strangely at peace. The door opened and Gideon came in, moving quietly. He found a bottle on a high shelf, whiskey probably, and poured himself a measure in a tin cup. He didn't offer her any, just stood by the fire, drinking in silence. Finally, he spoke. "You know you can't stay." "Can I?" "You got no legal right to these kids. No claim on this land. When word gets out that Silas died before you married him, someone will come. Relatives, the county, someone. They'll take the children, split them up most likely. Sell the land to cover Silas's debts." "He had debts?" "Everyone out here has debts," Gideon's voice was bitter. "That's how they keep you. The bank, the feed store, the doctor. You borrow to survive and you never quite catch up. Silas owed about $300, last I heard. Might as well be $3 million. Mara absorbed this information, adding it to her growing list of problems. "And you? What's your stake in this?" "Silas was my brother. We didn't get along, but he was still blood." Gideon stared into the fire. "I'll stick around until someone comes with a better claim. Make sure the kids don't starve in the meantime." "How generous." He looked at her sharply. "I didn't ask for this. I've got my own life, my own—" He stopped abruptly. "Your own what? Your own escape? Your own bottle?" Mara heard the harshness in her own voice and didn't regret it. These children need more than someone who'll stick around until it gets inconvenient. And you're going to give them more? A stranger who came west to marry a man for a roof and a meal? Gideon's words were cruel, but his eyes held something else. A challenge, perhaps, or a test. "Yes," Mara said simply, "because unlike you, I don't need blood or obligation to care about them. I just need to see what's right in front of me." They stared at each other across the firelight, and Mara saw the moment something shifted in Gideon's expression. A crack in his armor, a grudging acknowledgement. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said finally. "Probably both." Mara stood and moved to the door, looking out at the dark prairie. "Mr. Hale, I didn't come here to fight with you. Those children have lost enough. If you're staying to help, then help. If you're staying to drink and dig gardens out of guilt, then at least stay out of my way." She didn't wait for his response, just went to make up her own pallet near the fire, using blankets from her trunk. The floor was hard and cold, but she'd slept in worse places. As she settled down, she heard Gideon move to the farthest corner of the cabin, where he had his own bedroll. In the loft above, someone, probably Sarah, was crying quietly, trying not to wake the others. Mara wanted to go up and comfort her, but she sensed the girl needed privacy for her grief. Tomorrow, Mara promised herself. Tomorrow, they would begin to rebuild what had been broken. She lay in the dark, listening to the cabin settle around her. The creak of wood, the whisper of wind through the cracks, the breathing of 7 children who had no one else. Above her, through the gaps in the roof, she could see stars. They were brighter here than they had ever been in Philadelphia, hard and cold and impossibly distant. Mara Dwyer closed her eyes and prayed, not the formal prayers of her childhood, but something more desperate and honest. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm strong enough. But these children need someone, and I'm here. Please, let me be enough." The fire crackled and popped. The baby stirred and whimpered, then settled. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, its cry both lonely and defiant. A sound that seemed to say, "I am still here. I endure." And in the morning, when the sun rose red over the prairie, Mara Dwyer would still be here too, ready to face whatever came next. Because she had made a promise, not to Silas Hale, not to herself, but to 7 children who had learned not to expect miracles. She would not let them down. The first light came pale and cold through the paper windows, turning the cabin's interior gray before the sun thought to add color. Mara woke to the sound of someone moving, carefully, quietly, trying not to disturb the others. She opened her eyes to see Sarah climbing down from the loft, her thin nightdress ghostly in the pre-dawn gloom. The girl froze when she saw Mara was awake, her face flushing with embarrassment at being caught. "It's all right," Mara whispered. "I'm an early riser too." Sarah relaxed slightly and finished her descent. "I usually start the fire," she said, her voice barely audible. "Get water heating before the little ones wake up wanting breakfast. Then let's do it together." They worked in companionable silence, Sarah showing Mara where things were kept, the kindling box, the flint and steel, the bucket for carrying water. The routine was clearly well established, born of months of necessity. As flames caught and began to lick at the larger pieces of wood, Mara studied the girl's profile in the growing light. "How long have you been doing this alone?" she asked gently. Sarah kept her eyes on the fire. "Since Mama died. I was 10. Pa did what he could, but he had the fields, the animals, what was left of them. Someone had to mind the house and the babies." She said it without self-pity, just stating facts. "It wasn't so bad when Pa was here. He'd help in the evenings, and he was good at making us laugh. But after the snake," her voice cracked slightly, "Uncle Gideon doesn't laugh much." "No," Mara agreed, glancing at the corner where Gideon had bedded down. He was already gone, his blanket folded with military precision. "He doesn't seem the type." "He's not mean, though," Sarah said quickly, defensive. "He's just sad, I think, or angry, maybe both." Before Mara could respond, a small voice called from the loft. "Sarah, I'm hungry." "That's Beth," Sarah sighed. "She's always hungry first thing. Then let's see what we can do about that." The cabin came alive gradually, children appearing one by one like cautious birds. Beth climbed down the ladder with Matthew close behind, both of them watching Mara with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Lily appeared with Ada on her hip, the baby's face puffy from sleep. Caleb and Thomas came last, the older boy's expression guarded. Mara surveyed her resources. There was cornmeal in a barrel, some lard, salt, and precious little else. She'd seen frontier poverty before, but seeing it with 7 hungry children depending on it was different. "We'll make Johnny cakes," she announced. "Sarah, help me mix the batter. The rest of you, let's get faces washed and dressed. We've got a lot to do today." "What are we doing?" Matthew asked, his small face earnest. "Well, for one thing, we're going to make this place feel like a home again," Mara said. "And that starts with everyone having full bellies and clean clothes." The children exchanged glances, as if unsure whether to believe this promise. But they moved to follow her instructions, and soon the cabin was filled with the domestic sounds of mourning, water splashing, voices murmuring, the sizzle of cornmeal hitting the hot griddle. Gideon appeared as breakfast was being served, materializing in the doorway like a ghost. His hair was wet, suggesting he'd been to the creek, and he looked marginally more human than he had the night before. "Morning," he said gruffly, then to Mara. "I'm riding to the Johnson place. See if they've got any seed to spare. We're 3 weeks behind on planting." "Will you be back for supper?" Mara asked, ladling batter onto the griddle. He looked surprised that she'd asked, then nodded. "Should be. It's only 4 miles. Then I'll make sure there's enough." She flipped a Johnny cake expertly. "Thank you, Mr. Hale, for helping." Something flickered across his face, surprise again, or perhaps discomfort with gratitude. He nodded once more and left, and Mara heard a horse whinny as he rode away. "He doesn't eat breakfast," Caleb observed, watching through the door. "Says his stomach can't take it in the morning." "More likely his stomach can't take food when there's whiskey on offer," Sarah muttered, then looked stricken when she realized she'd spoken aloud. Mara pretended not to hear, focusing on feeding the children. They ate with desperate efficiency, and she made note of how quickly the food disappeared. She would need to be creative with meals, stretch everything as far as it would go. After breakfast, she organized the children like a general planning a campaign. Sarah would help her tackle the washing, sheets, clothes, anything that could be cleaned needed to be cleaned. Caleb and Thomas would work on securing the chicken coop, which was falling apart and letting the few remaining hens wander. Beth and Matthew would tidy the cabin while Lily watched Ada. "But it's already tidy," Beth protested weakly. "Tidy and clean are different things," Mara said firmly but kindly. "We're going to sweep every corner, shake out every blanket, and let the sun shine in. This place is going to sparkle." The morning dissolved into work. Mara heated water in every pot and pan she could find, then helped Sarah haul it outside where they'd set up a washing station. The girl's knowledge of laundry was rudimentary. She'd been doing her best, but no one had taught her properly. Mara showed her how to sort, how to scrub, how to rinse until the water ran clear. "Mama used to sing while she washed," Sarah said quietly, wringing out a small shirt that belonged to Matthew. "I don't remember the words anymore." "Then we'll make up new songs," Mara said. She began to hum a tune her own mother had favored, and after a moment Sarah joined in. Their voices carried across the yard, and Mara saw Beth poke her head out the door, smiling at the sound. By midday, the clothesline was heavy with drying laundry, and both Mara and Sarah were soaked and exhausted. But there was satisfaction in it, tangible progress, visible improvement. Inside, Beth and Matthew had swept until the dirt floor was smooth, and the cabin smelled of fresh air instead of stale grief. Mara made a simple lunch of bread and butter from her trunk. She'd brought supplies for the journey that were now a godsend, and they sat outside in the weak spring sunshine to eat. The children were quieter than normal, and Mara wondered if they were waiting for something bad to happen, for this strange woman to announce she was leaving after all. "This afternoon," she said, brushing crumbs from her skirt, "I need to take stock of what we have and what we need. Sarah, you'll know better than anyone what supplies are running low. Caleb, I'll need you to show me the barn and tell me about the animals. The rest of you, well, you've worked hard this morning. You've earned some time to play." "Play?" Thomas looked confused by the word. "Yes, play. Run around, chase the chickens, play tag, whatever children do when they're not working." Mara smiled at his bewildered expression. "Go on, but stay where I can see you." She watched as the younger children drifted away, uncertain at first, then gradually remembering how to be children. Matthew found a stick and began drawing patterns in the dirt. Beth picked wildflowers from the edge of the yard. Even Lily, still holding Ada, sat in the sunshine and sang softly to the baby. "They've forgotten how to be kids," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "We all have." Then we'll teach them again, Mara replied. Come on, show me what we're working with. The inventory was grim. In the cabin's small pantry, really just shelves covered with a curtain, there was perhaps 2 weeks' worth of cornmeal, some dried beans, a little salt pork, and almost no salt or sugar. No coffee, no tea, no luxuries of any kind. The root cellar beneath the floor held a few shriveled potatoes and nothing else. The chickens give us eggs, Sarah explained, when they're laying, but we lost most of the flock last winter. Fox got them. Pa kept meaning to fix the coop, but she trailed off. What about a cow? Milk would help, especially for Ada. We had one, Bessie, but Pa had to sell her last fall to pay the feed store bill. He said we'd get another come spring, but again that unfinished sentence, hanging with everything that would never happen now. In the barn, Caleb showed Mara their remaining assets, one aging horse named Buck, a handful of chickens, and a lot of empty stalls. We used to have pigs, he said, and more chickens, and Bessie, and Pa was talking about getting sheep. He said wool would bring good money, but everything just kept slipping away. Mara ran her hand along a stall door, feeling the splinters catch. The barn needed repairs, the fields needed planting, the children needed clothes and shoes and 100 other things. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders. Miss Mara? Caleb's voice was small. Are you going to leave? She looked at this boy who had lost so much and was bracing for more loss. No, Caleb, I'm not leaving. But how will we manage? Even with Uncle Gideon helping, I don't see how. We'll figure it out, Mara interrupted gently, one day at a time. Today, we got clean clothes and a tidy house. Tomorrow, we'll accomplish something else. Step by step, we'll build something better. He wanted to believe her. She could see it in his eyes. But belief was hard when life had taught you to expect disappointment. That afternoon, while the younger children played and Sarah watched them, Mara opened her trunks properly for the first time. She had so little, some clothes, a few books, her mother's Bible, the daguerreotype, but she also had needles and thread, fabric scraps saved for mending, a small sewing kit. She set these aside, already planning how to patch the children's clothes. At the bottom of one trunk, wrapped in cloth, was her mother's wedding ring. Mara held it up to the light, remembering her mother's hands, always working, always giving. She'd sold almost everything else to pay for her mother's burial and her father's debts, but this she'd kept. Pretty. Mara turned to find Beth standing behind her, eyes wide. It was my mother's, Mara explained. The only thing I have left of her. Our mama had a ring too, Beth said, but Pa buried her with it. He said she should take something beautiful with her. The little girl's face crumpled slightly. I miss her. I try to remember her face, but it gets harder. Mara pulled Beth into her lap, this small child who was trying so hard to be brave. I know, she whispered. I miss my mama too. But I think they'd want us to keep living, to keep finding beautiful things. Don't you? Beth nodded against her shoulder. Do you think Pa's with Mama now? I do. I think they're together, and they're watching over you, and they're proud of how strong you've been. They sat like that for a long time, woman and child, sharing their grief in the quiet afternoon. When Beth finally pulled away, she touched the ring gently. You should wear it, she said, so Mama and your mama can be friends. Mara's throat tightened. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this moment. There. Now they can both watch over all of us. Beth smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and ran back outside to tell her siblings about the ring. Mara watched her go, feeling the weight of the simple gold band on her finger. It felt like a promise, or perhaps a blessing. Gideon returned as the sun was lowering, riding Buck, who looked exhausted from the round trip. He dismounted stiffly, and Mara saw him wince as his feet hit the ground. Any luck? She called from where she was stirring a pot over the fire. Some. He led the horse to the barn, and when he returned he carried a burlap sack. Johnson had seed corn to spare. Not much, but enough to plant a few acres if we work fast. He says he'll come help with the plowing next week if I help him with his barn roof come summer. That's good. That's very good. Mara ladled stew into a bowl. She'd used the last of the dried beans and some wild onions Sarah had shown her how to find. It wasn't much, but it was hot and filling. Sit, Eat. Gideon took the bowl with a nod of thanks and sat on the bench outside, away from the chattering children inside. Mara let him be for a few minutes, then brought out her own bowl and sat beside him. "Thank you for going," she said. "I know you didn't have to." "Someone has to plant," he said shortly. "Can't eat dirt." They ate in silence for a while. Then Gideon said, "You did good today. The place looks better. Smells better, too." It was the first compliment he'd offered, and Mara felt absurdly pleased. The children did most of the work. They just needed direction. Sarah's been trying to keep it together, but she's just a kid herself. Gideon stared at his bowl. Ruth, their mother, she was the glue that held everything together. When she died, it was like the whole structure started to collapse. Silas tried, but he stopped, jaw tight. "You loved her," Mara said quietly. "Your brother's wife." Gideon's head snapped up, his eyes dangerous. "What makes you say that?" "The way you say her name, the way you talk about what she meant to this family." Mara kept her voice gentle, non-judgmental. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just observing." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Ruth was Silas's wife, and I never touched her, never said a word out of line, but yes, I loved her. Everyone who knew her loved her. She was that kind of person. When Silas brought her home, He rubbed his face roughly. "I left. Went north, worked lumber camps, tried to outrun it. Came back years later and they had a house full of kids, and Ruth was dying, and Silas looked like a man drowning. I couldn't stay and watch it, so I left again. I've been leaving my whole life." "But you came back when Silas died." "I was in Ogallala, working at the stockyards. A man came through who'd heard the news. I left that day. Rode straight through." Gideon's voice was raw. "I don't know why. Guilt, maybe. Or because I finally couldn't run anymore." Mara absorbed this, understanding him better now. The children need you. They need both of us. Whatever happened before, whatever you're carrying, it doesn't matter. What matters is right now, these 7 children, and whether we're going to help them survive. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. Mara stood, collecting their bowls. "Tomorrow, you'll start plowing. I'll handle the house and children. We'll work as a team, Mr. Hale. No more running." He looked up at her, and something in his expression softened. "You're a stubborn woman, Miss Dwyer." "Mrs. Hale," she corrected, surprising herself. "I may not have married your brother, but I'm claiming this family just the same. Someone has to." Gideon almost smiled. Almost. "All right then, Mrs. Hale. We'll see how long your stubbornness lasts against prairie reality." "Longer than you think," she promised. That night, after the children were asleep, Mara sat by the fire with Sarah's dress in her lap, mending the tears with careful stitches. Gideon was outside again, his preferred place apparently, and the cabin was peaceful in a way it hadn't been the night before. There was still grief here, still fear, but also something new. Hope. The dress was nearly finished when she heard crying, soft, muffled, from somewhere outside. Mara set down her sewing and slipped out into the night. The crying was coming from behind the barn. She found Caleb there, sitting in the dirt with his knees pulled to his chest, trying desperately to cry quietly so no one would hear. "Caleb?" She approached slowly. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" "Nothing," he choked out. "I'm fine. Go back inside." "I don't think you are fine." Mara sat beside him in the dirt, not touching him but present. "It's all right to be sad. It's all right to cry." "I can't," he said fiercely. "I have to be strong, for Sarah and the little ones. If I break down, they'll break down, and everything will fall apart." "Oh, Caleb." Mara's heart ached for this boy who was trying so hard to be a man. "That's too much to carry alone. You're 10 years old. You shouldn't have to be strong every minute of every day." "But Pa said, before he died, he said I was the man of the family now. He said I had to take care of everyone." "He shouldn't have said that," Mara said gently. "Not because you're not capable, but because it's not fair. You're a child, Caleb. You should get to be a child." "But who'll take care of them if I don't?" "I will, and Uncle Gideon will help, and Sarah will do her part because she's amazing and brave. But you don't have to carry it all." Mara opened her arms. Come here. For a moment he resisted, his thin body stiff with the effort of holding everything in. Then, like a dam breaking, he collapsed against her and sobbed, great wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. Mara held him tight, rocking slightly, murmuring wordless comfort while he released the grief and fear and overwhelming responsibility he'd been carrying. I miss him, Caleb wept. I miss Pa so much, and Mama, and I'm scared. I'm so scared we'll lose the house and they'll split us up and I'll never see Ada or Beth or any of them again. Listen to me. Mara cupped his face, making him meet her eyes. I promise you, I will fight with everything I have to keep this family together. Do you hear me? You're not going to lose each other, not if I have anything to say about it. But you're just one person. What if the law comes? What if the bank comes? Then we'll face them together, all of us. Mara wiped his tears with her thumbs. You're not alone anymore, Caleb. None of you are. I know I'm a stranger, and I know you have no reason to trust me yet, but I'm asking you to try. Can you do that? He nodded slowly, exhausted from crying. Why? He whispered. Why do you care so much? We're not your kids. Maybe not by blood, Mara said. But family is more than blood. Family is who you choose to love, who you choose to fight for. And I choose you. All 7 of you. Caleb buried his face in her shoulder again, but this time the tears were quieter, almost peaceful. They sat like that under the stars until his breathing evened out and she realized he'd fallen asleep, emotionally exhausted. Gideon appeared from the shadows, materializing so quietly she hadn't heard him approach. I'll carry him in, he said softly. He lifted the boy with surprising gentleness and carried him inside, laying him on his pallet without waking him. When he returned, he found Mara still sitting in the dirt behind the barn. You heard? She asked. Most of it. Gideon sat down beside her, not quite touching, but closer than he'd been before. Silas shouldn't have put that on him. The boy's already carrying too much. He was dying. People say things when they're dying. Doesn't make it right. Gideon was quiet for a moment. You meant what you said? About fighting to keep them together? Every word. You know the odds are against us. Silas owed money to half the territory. The county could decide these kids need to be in an orphanage or farmed out to different families. You got no legal standing. You're not their mother, not their stepmother, not even officially a guardian. Then I'll get legal standing. I'll adopt them if I have to. A single woman adopting 7 children? They'll laugh you out of the courthouse. Then I'll make them listen. Mara's voice was steel. I didn't come all this way to watch 7 children get scattered to the wind because adults can't figure out how to do the right thing. Gideon studied her in the moonlight. You're serious. As death. He shook his head slowly, something like admiration in his eyes. You're either going to save them or break your heart trying. Probably both, Mara admitted, but I have to try. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets, a distant coyote, the wind in the grass. Finally, Gideon spoke again. I'll help, however I can. I won't run this time. Thank you, Mara said simply. Don't thank me yet. We got a long road ahead. I know, but at least we're walking it together. The next morning brought a new rhythm. Gideon left early to start plowing the southern field, taking Buck and the old plow. Mara organized the children for their daily tasks, but this time with more laughter and less desperation. Beth sang while she swept. Matthew helped Caleb with the chickens and seemed proud of his work. Even Thomas, the quietest of them, smiled when Mara praised his efforts. Sarah was the revelation. Released from carrying the entire burden alone, she blossomed. She taught Mara songs her mother had taught her, showed her which wild plants were edible, demonstrated how to make soap from lye and fat. The girl was a wealth of frontier knowledge, and Mara made mental notes of everything, determined to become as competent as these children who'd been forced to grow up too fast. By midweek, they'd fallen into patterns that felt almost normal. Mornings were for essential chores, water hauling, fire tending, cooking, animal care. Afternoons, Mara insisted on lessons. She had the children practice reading from her Bible and doing arithmetic with sticks and stones. Sarah could already read fairly well, having been taught by her mother, but the younger ones needed help. Even Ada would sit contentedly in Mara's lap during lesson time, babbling along as if she understood. "Why do we need to read?" Thomas asked one afternoon, struggling with a simple passage. "Because reading opens doors," Mara said. "Because the world is bigger than this valley, and words are how we understand it. Because your mother wanted you to have educations, and we're going to honor that." "How do you know what Mama wanted?" Thomas challenged. "Because every mother wants her children to have chances she didn't have. It's the most universal thing in the world." Mara softened her voice. "And because Sarah told me. Your mama read to you every night when you were little, didn't she?" Thomas nodded reluctantly. "She knew all the best stories." "Then let's learn to read so we can tell those stories to Ada when she's older. She never got to hear her mama's voice, but she can hear the stories through us." Something shifted in Thomas's face, acceptance, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. He bent over his book with renewed focus, and Mara felt a small victory. But not everything was victories. On Thursday, Lily developed a cough that worried Mara. The girl tried to hide it, not wanting to be a burden, but by evening she was feverish and struggling to breathe. Mara spent the night beside her, applying cool cloths and trying to remember every folk remedy her mother had known. "Is she going to die?" Beth whispered, clutching Mara's skirt. "No," Mara said firmly, though she wasn't sure. "She's going to be fine. But I need you to be very brave and help Sarah with breakfast tomorrow while I stay with Lily. Can you do that?" Beth nodded, her little face solemn with responsibility. By morning, Lily's fever had broken, and though she was weak and pale, she was breathing easier. Mara nearly wept with relief. She hadn't realized how completely these children had wrapped themselves around her heart in less than a week. Gideon, who'd been watching the vigil from his corner, approached as Mara finally allowed herself to rest. "You should sleep," he said gruffly. "I'll watch her." "I'm all right." "You're exhausted. Sleep for a few hours? I'll wake you if anything changes." Mara wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her with a jaw-cracking yawn. "Just a few hours." "However long you need." Gideon sat down beside Lily's pallet. "Go on. I've got this." Mara dozed fitfully on her own pallet, one ear always tuned to Lily's breathing. When she woke, the sun was high. She'd slept longer than intended. But Gideon was still there, and Lily was sleeping peacefully, color returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," Mara said quietly. "She's a fighter, like her uncle." Gideon almost smiled. "And apparently like you." The crisis passed, but it left Mara shaken. These children were so vulnerable, so dependent on her now. What if she failed them? What if her stubbornness and determination weren't enough? That evening, as she stood outside watching the sun set over the prairie, Sarah came to stand beside her. "You're worried," the girl observed. "A little," Mara admitted. "About what happened with Lily. About everything. About whether I'm doing enough, whether I know enough, whether—" "You're doing more than enough," Sarah interrupted quietly. "Miss Mara, before you came, I honestly didn't know how we were going to survive. I knew how to cook and clean, but I didn't know how to make everything feel okay again. You do that. You make us feel like maybe things will be all right." Mara's eyes stung with tears. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "No," Sarah said. "You're doing more than that. You're giving us hope. That's different." The girl hugged her, quick and fierce, then ran back inside before Mara could respond. But the words stayed with her, warming her like a fire on a cold night. Sunday came, and Mara insisted they observe it properly. No work beyond the essential chores. Instead, she gathered the children in the cabin and read from the Bible, then taught them hymns she remembered from her childhood. Her voice was rusty, untrained, but she sang anyway, and gradually the children joined in. Even Gideon, leaning in the doorway, seemed moved by it. When the singing ended, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "That was nice." "Your brother would have wanted them to keep their faith," Mara said. "Yeah, Silas always was the godly one." Gideon's voice held old resentment and something else. Regret, maybe. "I gave up on God a long time ago." "Maybe God hasn't given up on you." He snorted. "Lady, if there's a God, he's got a cruel sense of humor bringing you all the way out here for a dead man." "Or maybe that's exactly where he needed me to be." Mara met his eyes steadily. Maybe those children needed someone who had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Maybe you needed someone who wouldn't let you run anymore. Getting philosophical on a Sunday morning? Just telling the truth. Mara handed Ada to Lily and stood. Come on, let's walk. The children can manage for a few minutes without us. They walked toward the ridge behind the cabin, where limestone outcroppings glowed gold in the morning sun. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, and Mara felt both small and strangely powerful. A single person in all this vastness, yet capable of changing 7 lives completely. You asked why I care, she said as they climbed. I've been thinking about that. The truth is, I came west because I had nothing left in Philadelphia. No family, no prospects, no future. I was disappearing a little more every day, becoming invisible. When Silas's letter came, it felt like someone actually saw me. Like I mattered. And then you got here, and he was gone. Yes, but the children weren't gone, and they needed someone. Maybe that's why I'm still here, because for the first time in years, I feel necessary. These kids need me, and that makes me real again. Gideon was quiet, processing this. You think that's enough? Needing to be needed? I think it's a start. The rest, the love, the belonging, that comes with time. Mara paused on the ridge, looking back at the cabin where smoke rose from the chimney and she could hear children's laughter on the breeze. Look at that. A week ago, that place was full of grief and despair. Now it's full of noise and life and hope. We did that, you and me. You did that, Gideon corrected. I just kept them from starving. We're a team, whether you like it or not. Mara smiled. Now come on. We should get back before they burn down the cabin trying to make dinner without supervision. As they walked back down, Gideon said quietly, For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. Those kids, they're better with you here. We all are. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her, and Mara treasured it like a gift. But even as life began to find a new normal, Mara knew it was fragile. They were living on borrowed time, borrowed food, borrowed peace, borrowed hope. Eventually, the outside world would intrude. Bills would come due. Questions would be asked. And when that happened, she would need to be ready to fight not just with love and determination, but with law and paper and words that carried weight beyond this valley. For now, though, she had this. 7 children learning to laugh again. A broken man learning not to run. A cabin transforming from a shell into a home. It wasn't much, measured against the vastness of the prairie and the crushing weight of debt and uncertainty, but it was enough to build on. And Mara Dwyer had always been good at building something from nothing. That night, after the children were asleep and Gideon had retreated to his corner, Mara wrote in the margin of her Bible, the only paper she had, Day 10, we endure, we grow stronger. Whatever comes, we face it together. Outside, the wind sang through the grass, and somewhere in the darkness, that coyote called again, lonely but undefeated, still here, still fighting, just like them. The storm arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Mara had first stepped off that train. She woke to the sound of thunder rolling across the prairie like distant cannon fire, and knew immediately that something beyond weather was coming. The sky had turned a sickly green-gray, and the wind carried an electric charge that made her skin prickle. Gideon was already up, securing the barn doors and moving Buck into the stall farthest from the failing roof. He looked grim when he came back inside, water streaming from his hat. Big one coming, he said shortly. Everyone stay inside. Sarah, make sure all the shutters are latched. Caleb, help me secure the door. The children moved with practiced efficiency. They'd weathered prairie storms before. But Mara saw fear in their eyes, especially Beth's. The little girl pressed close to her side as the wind began to howl in earnest. It's all right, Mara murmured, though her own heart was racing. We're safe in here. Mama died during a storm, Beth whispered. Not this kind. She was already sick, but it was storming, and I always think, I know, sweetheart, but we're all healthy and strong, and this cabin has stood for years. It'll stand through this, too. The storm hit like a fist. Rain hammered the roof with a sound like gravel being thrown, and wind screamed through every crack in the walls. The paper windows tore within minutes, and Mara rushed to hang blankets over the openings, trying to keep out the worst of the weather. Lightning flashed so bright it turned the dim cabin to daylight, and thunder followed instantly. The storm was right on top of them. Ada began to cry, a thin wail of terror, and Lily clutched her tighter, singing to her over the noise. Matthew and Thomas huddled together on a pallet, eyes wide. Even Caleb looked frightened, though he was trying to hide it. The storm raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only one. When it finally began to ease, moving east with the same violence it had brought, they emerged to survey the damage. Half the chicken coop was demolished. The clothesline Mara had strung so carefully was gone, along with the sheets that had been drying on it. The garden plot Gideon had worked so hard to prepare was a muddy morass, but the cabin still stood, and they were all alive. Could have been worse, Gideon said, surveying the wreckage. Could have been a twister. They were picking up debris when Mara heard it, the sound of a horse approaching at speed. She looked up to see a rider coming down the track, bent low over his mount's neck. As he drew closer, she recognized the horse. It was from the Johnson place, but this wasn't Mr. Johnson. The rider pulled up in the yard, breathless. He was perhaps 17, with Johnson's red hair and freckled face. "Mr. Hale?" he called. Gideon stepped forward. "That's me. What's wrong?" "Pa sent me. Storm knocked a tree through our barn roof. We got 3 cows trapped inside, and Pa's afraid the whole structure's going to collapse. He's asking if you can come help. He needs every able man." "Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. Gideon was already moving toward the barn to saddle Buck. The boy hesitated, looking at Mara and the children. Pa also said, "Ma'am, there's a man in town. Came in on yesterday's train. He's been asking questions about the Hale place, about Mr. Silas Hale's estate." Mara felt ice in her stomach. "What kind of questions?" "Don't know exactly. Pa just said I should warn you. He don't trust the look of the fellow, dressed too fancy, carrying papers. Pa thinks he might be from the bank or the county or something." "Thank you for the warning," Mara said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Tell your father we appreciate it." The boy nodded and rode off. Gideon, leading Buck from the barn, met Mara's eyes across the muddy yard, and that look was everything they'd both been dreading. The outside world had found them. "I have to go help Johnson," Gideon said, "but I'll be back as soon as I can. Don't let anyone into the house while I'm gone. You hear me? Anyone comes with papers, you tell them they need to come back when I'm here." "I understand." Mara's voice was calmer than she felt. "Sarah," Gideon called, "you're in charge of the little ones. Caleb, you stay close to Miss Mara. If there's trouble, you run to Johnson's place fast as you can." The children nodded solemnly, understanding that something serious was happening even if they didn't know what. Gideon mounted Buck and rode off at a gallop, leaving Mara standing in the muddy yard with 7 frightened children and a knot of dread in her gut. "Inside," she said briskly. "We need to clean up from the storm and get this place in order." They worked in tense silence, everyone listening for the sound of an approaching rider. But the morning passed without incident, then afternoon. Mara made lunch from their dwindling supplies and tried to act normal, tried to keep the children from sensing her fear. But Sarah, perceptive as always, drew her aside. "Someone's coming to take us away, aren't they?" the girl asked bluntly. Mara considered lying, then decided Sarah deserved the truth. "Someone's asking questions. That doesn't mean they'll take you, but it means we need to be prepared." "Prepared how?" "I don't know yet." Mara gripped Sarah's shoulders. "But I meant what I said. I won't let them split you up. Whatever happens, we fight to stay together. What if they say you don't have the right? You're not our mother. You're not even married to Pa. He died before you got here." "Then I'll find a way to get the right." Mara's voice was fierce. "Laws are made by people, Sarah. And people can be convinced, persuaded, or if necessary, fought. I'm not giving up without a battle." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The knock came just before supper, when the light was fading and Mara was stirring a pot of thin soup over the fire. 3 sharp raps on the door that made everyone in the cabin freeze. Mara wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the door, her heart pounding. Through the crack, she could see a man on the porch, tall, thin, dressed in a dark suit that looked absurdly out of place on the prairie. He carried a leather satchel and wore spectacles that caught the last of the daylight. "Can I help you?" she called through the door. "Mrs. Hale?" His voice was cultured, Eastern, not unlike her own had been before 3 weeks of frontier living had worn the polish off. "Who's asking?" "My name is Cornelius Blackwell. I'm a representative of the Midwest Agricultural Bank. I'm looking for Silas Hale or his legal representative. I was informed in town that this is the Hale residence." Mara's hands tightened on the doorframe. "Mr. Hale is deceased. He passed 3 weeks ago." A pause. "I see. And you are?" "Mara Hale. I was to marry Mr. Hale. I arrived the day after his death." "I see," Blackwell repeated, and there was something in his tone that made Mara's skin crawl, a satisfied sort of curiosity, as if he'd just confirmed something he suspected. "Mrs. Hale, I need to discuss Mr. Silas Hale's outstanding debts with whoever is currently managing the estate. Might I come in?" "Mr. Hale's brother is the executor. He's away at the moment, helping a neighbor. You'll need to return when he's here." "When might that be?" "I don't know. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow." Another pause. Mara could feel him assessing the situation, deciding his next move. "Mrs. Hale, I understand this is a difficult time. However, I must inform you that Midwest Agricultural Bank holds a note on this property in the amount of $247. The note was due March 1st. It is now late April, and no payment has been made." "Mr. Hale is dead," Mara said again, fighting to keep her voice level. "You can't collect from a dead man." "No, but the estate must satisfy the debt. That typically means liquidating assets, in this case the land and any remaining livestock. I'm authorized to begin that process." "You'll do no such thing," Mara's voice turned to steel. "There are 7 children in this house who have just lost their father. You're not taking their home." "Ma'am, I sympathize truly, but the law is clear. The debt must be satisfied." "Then it will be satisfied, but not tonight, and not by you walking in here and claiming whatever you want. You'll deal with Mr. Gideon Hale, the executor, in proper fashion. Now I suggest you return to town before full dark. The prairie isn't kind to strangers after sunset." She heard him shift on the porch, considering. "Very well. I'll return tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Please inform Mr. Gideon Hale that his presence is required. Good evening, Mrs. Hale." His footsteps retreated, and Mara heard a horse being led away. She stood frozen at the door for a long moment, then turned to find all 7 children staring at her with terrified eyes. "He wants to take the house," Caleb said flatly. "He's going to sell it." "Not if I can help it." Mara moved to the fire, her hands shaking as she stirred the soup. "Sarah, set the table, please. Everyone else, wash up for supper. We're not giving up yet." But as they ate, the children picking at their food, Ada fussing in Lily's arms, Mara's mind raced. $247 might as well have been 2,000. She had nothing. Gideon likely had nothing. Even if they could scrape together partial payment, the bank would still take the land. Unless. An idea began to form, wild and desperate and probably illegal. But Mara had learned in her weeks here that frontier justice was different from city law. Out here, what mattered was what you could prove, what you could defend, and who your neighbors believed. When Gideon finally returned after dark, exhausted and muddy from helping repair the Johnson barn, Mara met him at the door. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Outside." They walked a short distance from the cabin, far enough that the children couldn't hear. The night was clear after the storm, stars brilliant overhead, and Mara could see Gideon's face in the moonlight as she told him about Blackwell's visit. $247, Gideon repeated when she finished. "Christ, that's more than I thought. Can you pay it?" "I've got maybe $30 to my name. You?" "Less than $1." They stood in silence, the impossibility of the situation settling over them like a weight. Finally, Gideon spoke. "There's one thing we could do. It's not exactly legal." "Tell me." "Silas wrote to you, asked you to marry him. You came all this way in good faith. The fact that he died before you arrived, that's just bad timing." Gideon looked at her intently. "What if we say you did marry him? What if we say you married him the day before he died, that you arrived early?" Mara's breath caught. "You want me to lie?" "I want those kids to keep their home. A widow has more rights than a stranger. A widow can inherit property, manage the estate, make decisions. A woman who never married the deceased has none of that. But there's no record, no marriage certificate. Silas was married by a circuit preacher out here. They don't always file paperwork promptly. Sometimes it takes months to make it to the courthouse. We could say the marriage happened, but the paperwork hasn't been filed yet. Gideon's voice was urgent. It's not perfect, but it might buy us time. Might give you legal standing to negotiate with the bank. And when they ask for proof, we've got Silas's letter to you. We've got 7 children who'll say they saw their father marry you. Kids can be coached to tell the right story. We've got neighbors who want to help. Johnson already sent his boy to warn us. These prairie folk, they stick together against outsiders, especially against banks. Mara's mind spun. What Gideon was proposing was fraud. It was lying under oath if it came to that. It went against everything her mother had taught her about honesty and integrity. But her mother had never had to choose between morality and 7 hungry children. If we do this, she said slowly, we have to commit completely. One slip, one person who doesn't back the story, and it all falls apart. I know. The children. They'd have to lie too. Can we ask that of them? They're already going to lose everything if we don't try. Gideon's face was hard. Sometimes survival requires compromises with the truth. Mara thought of Sarah's exhausted face, of Caleb crying behind the barn, of little Beth asking if she would be their new mama. She thought of Ada, who would never remember her real mother but might grow up without any mother at all if they were split up and sent to different families or orphanages. All right, she said, we'll do it. But Gideon, if this goes wrong, if they discover what we've done, I'll take full responsibility. I won't let you or the children suffer for it. Like hell you will. We're in this together. He held out his hand. Partners? Mara took it, feeling the calluses, the strength in his grip. Partners. They walked back to the cabin where the children were waiting, anxiety written on every face. Gideon gathered them all close, even pulling Thomas and Matthew from their corner where they'd been pretending to play. Listen carefully, he said. What I'm about to tell you is very important, and I need you all to understand and agree before we go forward. 7 pairs of eyes fixed on him, solemn and scared. The man who came today, Mr. Blackwell, he wants to take the house and land because your father owed money to the bank. If he succeeds, you'll all be separated, sent to different families or to an orphanage. You'll lose each other. Beth whimpered, and Sarah pulled her close. Caleb's face went white. But, Gideon continued, there's a way to stop him. Miss Mara has rights if she was married to your father. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell everyone, Mr. Blackwell, anyone who asks, that your father married Miss Mara 2 days before he died, that she arrived early in time for the wedding. But that's not true, Thomas said, confused. She came after Pa died. I know, but sometimes the truth isn't enough to protect the people we love. Gideon's voice was gentle but firm. I'm asking you all to tell this story. Miss Mara arrived 3 days before your father died. They were married by the circuit preacher who was passing through. You all witnessed it. It was a simple ceremony right here in the cabin. Do you understand? You want us to lie, Caleb said slowly. I want you to protect your family, Gideon corrected. There's a difference. Sarah spoke up, her voice steady. If we tell this story, if we all agree to it, then Miss Mara can stay, legally, and we can keep the house? It's not guaranteed, Mara interjected. There's still the debt, but it gives us a chance. It gives me the legal right to fight for you. Then we do it, Sarah said immediately. Whatever we have to do, we stay together. But it means lying, Thomas persisted. Mama always said lying was wrong. Mara knelt before him, taking his small hands in hers. Your mama was right. Lying is usually wrong. But sometimes, Thomas, there are situations where the bigger wrong is letting bad things happen when you could prevent them. The law says I have no right to you because I never married your father. But my heart says differently. My heart says you're my children now, and I'll do anything, including bend the truth, to keep you safe. Thomas searched her face, processing this moral complexity with the seriousness of a much older child. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll say you married Pa. I'll say I was there. One by one, the other children agreed. Even little Beth, who barely understood what they were planning, nodded solemnly. Ada gurgled in Lily's arms, oblivious to the conspiracy being formed around her. "We need to get the story straight," Gideon said. "Details matter. Sarah, you're the oldest. You'll need to describe the ceremony convincingly." They spent the next hour crafting the lie, weaving it together like a quilt, each person adding their piece until it formed a coherent whole. The circuit preacher's name was Reverend Thomas Mitchell, a real man who did travel through occasionally. The ceremony had been in the evening, right here by the fireplace. Mara had worn her blue traveling dress. Silas had been weak but happy. The children had all been present. It had been simple but meaningful. They practiced the story until even the younger children could tell it without hesitation. Gideon played the role of interrogator, asking questions from different angles, trying to trip them up. Gradually, the lie began to feel almost real. An alternative history that might have been true in a different world where snakes didn't hide in woodpiles and trains arrived on time. When they finally let the exhausted children go to bed, Mara felt ill with what they'd done. She'd just taught 7 orphans to lie, to commit fraud, to deceive authorities. What kind of mother, false or otherwise, did that make her? "Stop," Gideon said, reading her expression. "You're doing what has to be done. No more, no less." "My mother would be ashamed of me." "Your mother isn't here, these children are. And they need you more than they need your clear conscience." His words were harsh, but his eyes were sympathetic. "I know it's not what you wanted, but life rarely is. What if it doesn't work? What if Blackwell sees through it? Then we improvise, but we don't give up." Gideon moved toward his corner, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think Silas would approve. He loved those kids more than anything. If lying keeps them together, he'd call it a worthy sin." Mara wasn't sure about theology of worthy sins, but she understood what Gideon meant. Love sometimes required compromise with perfection. Protecting the innocent sometimes meant bending the rules meant to protect them. She lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the lie until it was smooth as truth. Somewhere in the loft, she could hear one of the children shifting restlessly. Tomorrow, Cornelius Blackwell would return, and they would test their story against a man whose job was to see through deception. She touched the ring on her finger, her mother's ring, which she'd been wearing for weeks now. In the darkness, she whispered an apology to her mother's memory, then a prayer for forgiveness. Finally, she whispered a promise to the children sleeping around her. Whatever it took, whatever she had to do, she would not let them be torn apart. When morning came, gray and cool, Mara rose before the children and prepared herself with unusual care. She put on her best dress, pinned her hair neatly, and studied herself in the small mirror she'd brought from Philadelphia. She needed to look like a widow, feel like a widow, be a widow in every way that mattered. The children woke to the smell of cornmeal mush, breakfast cooked with the last of their supplies, and the tension in the cabin was palpable. They ate in near silence, everyone listening for the sound of an approaching horse. At precisely 10 o'clock, the knock came. Gideon answered this time, opening the door to reveal Cornelius Blackwell, looking no less out of place in daylight than he had the evening before. Behind him stood another man, older, heavy-set, with the kind of face that suggested he'd spent his life saying no to desperate people. "Mr. Gideon Hale?" Blackwell asked. "That's right. I'm Cornelius Blackwell, representing Midwest Agricultural Bank. This is Mr. Horace Turnbull, the county clerk. We've come to discuss the matter of the outstanding note on this property." "Come in, then." Gideon stepped back, allowing both men to enter. They stood in the cabin's center, surveying the space with expressions that mixed pity and professional detachment. The children were arrayed around Mara like a defensive wall, Sarah holding Ada, Beth clutching Mara's skirt, the boys standing rigid with tension. "Mr. Hale," Blackwell began, opening his satchel and removing papers. "As I informed Mrs. Hale yesterday, your late brother owed the bank $247, due March 1st. The note is now significantly overdue. The bank is prepared to foreclose on the property to satisfy the debt." "We're aware of the debt," Gideon said evenly. "But my brother had dependents, 7 children and a widow. Surely some accommodation can be made." "A widow?" Blackwell's eyebrows rose. "I was informed that Silas Hale died unmarried." "You were informed incorrectly. Mara stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Mr. Hale and I were married 2 days before his death. I am his legal widow. Blackwell and Turnbull exchanged glances. The clerk pulled out a ledger, flipping through pages. I have no record of a marriage license or certificate filed for Silas Hale. The circuit preacher who performed the ceremony hasn't filed the paperwork yet, Mara explained, keeping her voice calm. As you gentlemen surely know, paperwork from circuit preachers can take months to make its way to the courthouse. But I assure you the marriage was legal and binding. I see. Blackwell's tone suggested he saw quite clearly that something was amiss. And the name of this preacher? Reverend Thomas Mitchell, Gideon supplied. Comes through every few months, Methodist circuit. Turnbull made a note in his ledger. And you have witnesses to this ceremony? 7 of them, Mara gestured to the children. Mr. Hale's children were all present. Sarah, would you tell these gentlemen what you saw? Sarah stepped forward, and Mara's heart swelled with pride at the girl's composure. Pa and Miss Mara, Mrs. Hale, got married right here, by the fireplace. It was evening, 3 days before Pa died. Reverend Mitchell said the words, and they held hands, and Pa kissed her after. We all watched. I wore my blue dress, Mara added, the same one I'd traveled in. We didn't have time for anything fancy. Mr. Hale was already weakening from the snake bite. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. I was told Mr. Hale died from a snake bite received 3 days before Mrs. Hale's arrival. You were told wrong, Caleb spoke up, his young voice firm. Miss Mara, our stepmother, she got here in time. She took care of Pa those last days. She was with him when he died. This was the dangerous part. The details they'd added to make the story more believable, but which also gave Blackwell more opportunities to find inconsistencies. This is all very convenient, Blackwell said dryly. A marriage with no filed paperwork, witnessed only by children, occurring just days before death. Forgive my skepticism, but it sounds remarkably designed to give Mrs. Hale legal standing she wouldn't otherwise possess. Are you calling my stepmother a liar? Caleb's face flushed with anger. Real anger, Mara realized, not performed. The boy had convinced himself of the truth of their story. I'm suggesting that the timing is suspicious. Blackwell turned to Turnbull. Without a filed marriage certificate, can we consider this woman a legal widow? The clerk pursed his lips thoughtfully. If there are multiple witnesses to a ceremony performed by an ordained minister, the marriage would be considered valid even without filed paperwork. The paperwork is administrative, not constitutive. But we only have the testimony of interested parties, the supposed widow and the children who would benefit from her legal standing. And mine, Gideon's voice cut through the tension. I witnessed it too. Silas asked me to stand up with him. I heard him speak his vows. You're also an interested party, Mr. Hale. You're the executor of the estate. Then ride out to the Johnson place, 4 miles south, Gideon suggested. Ask John Johnson and his wife. They stopped by the next day, brought food. They congratulated Silas on his marriage. This was a gamble. They hadn't had time to coordinate with the Johnsons, but Gideon was betting that prairie loyalty would triumph over strict adherence to truth, and from what Mara had seen, it was a reasonable bet. Blackwell and Turnbull consulted in low voices. Finally, Turnbull spoke. Even assuming the marriage was valid, that doesn't resolve the debt issue. The estate still owes $247. I'm aware, Mara said. And as my late husband's widow, I'm prepared to negotiate terms. We can't pay the full amount immediately, that's obvious. But we can make partial payments if you'll restructure the note. The bank isn't in the business of charity, Mrs. Hale. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for basic human decency and reasonable business practice. Mara's voice took on steel. You foreclose on this property, you'll take land that needs significant work to be productive. The cabin needs repairs, the fields need planting, the barn is falling apart. You'll get a property that might fetch half the debt in a sale, if you're lucky. Then you'll have 7 orphans on your conscience. The bank doesn't have a conscience, madam. It has fiduciary responsibilities. But you do, don't you, Mr. Blackwell? You have a conscience? Mara stepped closer, holding his gaze. You can see these children. You can see what you'd be doing to them. Yes, my husband owed money. But he was trying. He was working this land, raising these children alone after his wife died. Then a snake killed him before he could make his payment. Is that really grounds for destroying 7 young lives? Blackwell's face revealed nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. Discomfort, perhaps, or the faint stirring of guilt. Mrs. Hale makes a reasonable point, Turnbull said quietly. The property in its current state wouldn't satisfy the debt. And there's the matter of the children. The county would have to take responsibility for them if they're made homeless. That's an expense the county would rather avoid. Are you suggesting the county pressured the bank to show leniency? Blackwell's tone was sharp. I'm suggesting everyone's interests might be better served by restructuring rather than foreclosure. Turnbull closed his ledger. Give Mrs. Hale a year. Let her work the land, make what payments she can. Review the situation then. If she's made no progress, foreclose at that time. But give her a chance. And if Reverend Mitchell never files the marriage certificate? If it turns out there was no legal marriage? Then I'll handle that matter separately, Turnbull said. But for now, I'm satisfied that multiple witnesses have attested to a ceremony. That's sufficient for county records until proven otherwise. Mara could have kissed the county clerk. He knew, or at least suspected, that their story was manufactured, but he was choosing to look the other way. Prairie justice, she realized, favored orphans over banks. Blackwell was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he sighed. Very well. I'll recommend to the bank that they extend the note for 1 year with quarterly payments of $62 required to keep the account current. But understand, Mrs. Hale, if you miss even one payment, foreclosure proceedings will begin immediately. The bank's patience is limited. I understand. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. He packed his papers away, clearly unhappy with the outcome, but unwilling to fight both the county clerk and the weight of public opinion that would undoubtedly side with the orphans. I'll return in 3 months to collect the first payment. That will be $62, due by July 15th. We'll have it, Mara promised, though she had no idea how. After the 2 men left, the cabin erupted. The children cheered, Sarah burst into tears of relief, and even Gideon allowed himself a small smile. They had won, at least for now. They had 3 months to find $62, which might as well have been $62,000, but at least they still had their home. That evening, as Mara stirred a celebratory supper, they'd slaughtered one of the chickens, a sacrifice but a necessary one. She felt Gideon's presence beside her. You did good today, he said quietly. You looked Blackwell right in the eye and never flinched. I was terrified. I know, but you didn't show it. That takes courage. He paused. We bought time, but $62 in 3 months, that's going to be hard. I'll find a way. I can take in washing, mending, maybe hire out for harvest work when the time comes. And I'll look for day labor. Johnson mentioned needing help. Others might too. Ooh, Gideon's face was thoughtful. We might just pull this off. We have to. Mara looked at the children, who were playing together with a lightness she hadn't seen before. The crushing fear of separation had been lifted, at least temporarily. For them. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned down to coals, Mara sat outside and looked at the stars. She'd lied today. She'd committed fraud. She'd corrupted children and co-opted a county clerk into turning a blind eye to deception. And she'd do it all again in a heartbeat if it meant keeping this family together. Somewhere in Philadelphia, there was a version of Mara Dwyer who would have been horrified by what she'd become. A woman who bent rules and twisted truth to serve her purposes. But that Mara Dwyer had been small and scared and disappearing. This Mara Hale, for she was that now, legally or not, was someone different, someone stronger, someone willing to fight with any weapon available, including lies, if that's what protecting her family required. She touched the ring on her finger and whispered into the prairie darkness, I'm sorry, Mama, but I'm not sorry enough to stop. The wind carried her words away into the vast Nebraska night, where coyotes called and stars burned cold and distant, bearing witness to all the small human struggles playing out beneath them. Struggles for survival, for dignity, for love in a world that offered none of these things freely. And in the morning, life would go on. Fields would need planting. Children would need feeding. $62 would need to be found somehow. But tonight, they were together. They were safe, and they had won a battle if not yet the war. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The reprieve they'd won from Blackwell lasted exactly 5 days before reality reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. Mara woke on Sunday morning to find Matthew burning with fever, his small body convulsing with chills despite the blankets piled over him. By afternoon, Beth had it too, and by evening, Thomas was showing symptoms. "It's the fever," Sarah said, her voice tight with terror. "The same one that took Mama." Mara's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm. "We don't know that. Fevers can be many things. We'll treat it and they'll recover." But even as she spoke, she was remembering Lily's illness weeks ago, how close they'd come to losing her. And this seemed worse. The children's temperatures climbed higher, their breathing grew labored, and red spots began appearing on their skin. "Scarlet fever," Gideon said grimly when he saw the rash. "Christ, we need a doctor." "The nearest doctor is in North Platte, 20 miles away," Sarah said. "And even if we could get him here, we can't afford to pay him." "I'll ride for him anyway." Gideon was already moving toward the door. "Stay here. Keep them cool. Force water if you can. I'll be back with help." He was gone before Mara could protest, leaving her alone with 7 children, 3 of them desperately ill. She organized Sarah and Caleb to help, sending them to draw cold water from the creek, while she stripped the feverish children down to their underclothes and began applying cool compresses. Ada, sensing the crisis, fussed and cried in Lily's arms until Lily herself looked ready to collapse from exhaustion. "Give her to me," Mara said. "You need to rest too, sweetheart, or you'll get sick yourself." "I can help," Lily protested, but her eyes were shadowed with fatigue. "You are helping, but even helpers need rest. Go lie down for an hour. That's an order." The night was endless. Matthew's fever climbed so high he began talking nonsense, crying for his mother in a voice that broke Mara's heart. Beth thrashed and whimpered, and Thomas lay frighteningly still, his breathing shallow and rapid. Mara moved between them like a ghost, applying fresh compresses, dribbling water between cracked lips, praying with every breath that they would survive until Gideon returned with the doctor. Sarah worked beside her without complaint, though tears streamed down her face whenever she thought Mara wasn't looking. Caleb sat with Matthew, holding his little brother's hand and talking to him in a low, steady voice about fishing trips and adventures they'd have when he was better. Dawn came gray and cold, and the children were no better. If anything, Matthew seemed worse. His fever had spiked again, and the rash had spread across his entire body. Mara was changing his compress for what felt like the 1,000th time when she heard horses approaching at speed. Gideon burst through the door, followed by a man carrying a medical bag. The doctor was perhaps 60, with silver hair and tired eyes that had seen too much suffering. He took one look at the sick children and began issuing orders. "Boil water. I need clean cloths. How long have they been like this?" "Since yesterday morning for Matthew," Mara said, moving to comply. The others developed symptoms through the day. The doctor examined each child with efficient thoroughness, checking pupils, listening to breathing, studying the rash. His face revealed nothing, but Mara saw his jaw tighten when he checked Matthew. "It's scarlet fever, as suspected," he said finally. "The good news is you've been doing the right things, keeping them cool, forcing fluids. The bad news is this is going to get worse before it gets better." "How much worse?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "The next 48 hours are critical. If they survive that, they'll likely recover. But scarlet fever is deadly, especially in children. I won't lie to you, we could lose 1 or more of them." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mara felt her knees go weak, but she forced herself to stay upright, to stay strong. "What do we do?" "Exactly what you've been doing. Keep the fever down. Force fluids, water, thin broth, anything they'll take. Watch for signs of breathing difficulty. I have some willow bark that will help with the fever, and laudanum if the pain becomes too severe." He began unpacking his bag. "I'll stay for a few hours, get them stabilized. But I have other patients. There's an outbreak in the county. I'll come back tomorrow if I can, but you may be on your own." "How much do we owe you?" Gideon asked. "We'll settle up when the crisis is past. Right now, let's focus on keeping these children alive." For the next 3 days, the cabin became a hospital. The doctor returned twice, each time looking more haggard as the outbreak spread through the county. Mara and Sarah took turns sleeping in shifts of 2 hours, never leaving the sick children unattended. Gideon rode to the Johnson place and returned with soup and bread that Mrs. Johnson had sent, along with an offer to take the healthy children if it would help. "No," Mara said firmly. "We stay together. That's the whole point of everything we've done." But by the third night, she was beginning to wonder if they'd sacrifice truth only to have death claim them anyway. Matthew was delirious, calling for his dead mother. Beth's breathing had become a terrible rattle. Thomas lay so still that Mara had to put her hand on his chest repeatedly just to confirm he was still breathing. She was kneeling beside Matthew's pallet, praying with a desperation that bordered on rage, when Sarah touched her shoulder. "Miss Mara, you need to rest. You haven't slept in almost 24 hours. "I can't. What if you collapse and we lose you too?" Sarah's voice was fierce. "We need you healthy. Please, just 2 hours. I'll wake you if anything changes." Too exhausted to argue, Mara stumbled to her own pallet and fell into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. She woke to Sarah shaking her shoulder, terror in the girl's eyes, and for one horrible moment thought the worst had happened. "What is it?" she gasped, already moving toward the sick children. "Nothing bad," Sarah said quickly. "Nothing bad. Miss Mara, the fevers broke, all 3 of them. While you were sleeping, the fevers broke." Mara crossed to Matthew's pallet and laid her hand on his forehead. Cool. Blessedly, miraculously cool. His breathing was deep and regular, his color better. She checked Beth, then Thomas, both the same. The crisis had passed. She sat back on her heels and wept, great heaving sobs of relief that shook her whole body. Sarah knelt beside her, crying too, and soon Caleb and Lily had joined them in a huddle of grateful tears. Even Gideon, who had maintained stoic composure throughout the ordeal, wiped his eyes roughly and turned away. The doctor, when he came that afternoon, confirmed what they already knew. The children would live. They'd be weak for a while, need careful feeding and rest, but they would recover. The bill for his services was $12, money they didn't have, but money Mara would find somehow. "You saved them," the doctor said as he prepared to leave. "Most of the credit goes to you, Mrs. Hale. You kept them alive long enough for their bodies to fight off the infection. Many mothers couldn't have done what you did." After he left, Mara collapsed into sleep that lasted 16 hours. When she woke, weak and disoriented, she found the cabin transformed. Someone, probably Sarah with help from Caleb, had cleaned everything, aired the bedding, and prepared food. The recovering children were sitting up, eating thin broth and looking like they might actually survive. "You're awake," Sarah said, bringing her water. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been run over by a wagon." Mara's voice was hoarse from days of giving orders and praying aloud. "How long was I asleep?" "A day and a half. We were getting worried, but Uncle Gideon said to let you rest. You'd earned it." "The children?" "Getting better every hour. Matthew ate real food this morning. Not much, but he kept it down. Beth's asking for stories. Thomas is cranky, which means he's recovering." Mara felt tears threaten again and blinked them back. "You did so well, Sarah. I couldn't have managed without you." "We're a team," Sarah said simply. "That's what families do. They take care of each other." It took another week before the sick children were strong enough to resume normal activities, and by then May had arrived with its promise of growth and renewal. The fields Gideon had planted were showing green shoots. The chickens, down to just 4 after they'd slaughtered one for the celebration dinner and lost another to a fox, were laying regularly again. Life was reasserting itself. But the crisis had cost them precious time and resources. The doctor's bill was still unpaid. Their food supplies were critically low. And the first quarterly payment to the bank, $62, was due in just over 2 months. Mara sat at the rough table one evening, doing calculations on the back of an old piece of paper. No matter how she added and subtracted, the numbers didn't work. They needed money, and they needed it fast. "What are you thinking?" Gideon asked, sitting across from her. "I'm thinking we're going to lose this place unless we find a way to earn money. Real money, not just enough to eat." "I've been thinking the same thing. Johnson offered me day labor, plowing, fence mending, whatever he needs. Says he can pay 50 cents a day. That's good, but not enough. If you work every day between now and July, that's maybe $40. We need 62, plus we need to eat, Plus we owe the doctor $12. So we need about $90 total in 2 months. Gideon ran his hand through his hair. That's impossible. Nothing's impossible. We just have to be creative. Mara's mind was already working, considering and discarding options. I can take in laundry and mending from town. Sarah's good with a needle. She can help. That might bring in a few dollars a week. And I'll work every day job I can find. Maybe we can sell something. We have nothing to sell except the land itself, and that defeats the purpose. Mara tapped the paper. What about crops? When can we harvest? Not until late summer at earliest, and that's if everything goes perfectly. We'd need to plant more, and we don't have seed money. They sat in frustrated silence, each trying to solve a problem that seemed to have no solution. Then Caleb, who had been pretending to sleep in his loft but was actually listening to every word, called down. What about the ridge? What about it? Gideon asked. Pa always said there might be something up there worth finding. He'd go walking sometimes, looking at rocks. He said once that this whole area used to be underwater millions of years ago, and sometimes you could find things, fossils and such. He said collectors back east paid money for them. Mara and Gideon exchanged glances. It was a long shot, but it was something. Did your father ever find anything? Mara asked. Don't know. He never said if he did, but he kept looking, so maybe he thought it was worth trying. The next morning, Mara and Gideon climbed the ridge behind the cabin while Sarah watched the children. The limestone formations glowed in the early sun, ancient and patient. Mara had no idea what fossils looked like, but she examined the rock faces carefully, looking for anything unusual. Here, Gideon called after an hour of searching. Look at this. Embedded in the limestone was what looked like a perfect seashell, larger than Mara's hand. It was beautiful, spiraled and delicate, turned to stone by unimaginable spans of time. Is that what we're looking for? She asked. I think so. I've heard tell of university men paying for fossils. They study them, try to understand the past. Gideon worked carefully to extract the fossil without damaging it. This is good quality, well preserved. Might be worth something. They spent the morning searching and found 3 more fossils, 2 more shells, and what might have been part of an ancient fish. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I'll ride to North Platte tomorrow, Gideon said as they descended. There's a man there who deals in curiosities. He might know what these are worth, or who might buy them. 2 days later, Gideon returned with news. The curiosity dealer knew a professor at a university in Omaha who collected fossils. He'd offered $5 for the 4 specimens, not a fortune, but real money. More importantly, he said there was probably more on the ridge, and if they found better specimens, he could offer more. It became part of their routine. Every few days, when time allowed, Mara or Gideon or both would spend an hour or 2 searching the ridge. Sometimes they found nothing. Sometimes they found fossils that were fragmentary or damaged. But occasionally, they found something exceptional, a complete shell, a fish vertebra. Once a series of small bones that the dealer said belonged to an ancient bird. The money trickled in slowly, but it was steady. $5 here, $3 there, once a glorious $15 for a particularly fine specimen. They established a relationship with the dealer, who established a relationship with the university. By mid-June, they'd accumulated $38 toward their payment. But even as the fossil hunting provided one solution, new problems emerged. The chickens stopped laying, stress from the fox attacks and poor feed. The roof began leaking worse than ever, and they lost a bag of precious cornmeal to water damage. Buck, their only horse, developed a limp that required rest, making it impossible for Gideon to take day labor jobs that required transportation. Mara took in laundry from 3 families in town, scrubbing clothes until her hands bled. She mended everything anyone brought her, working by firelight long after the children were asleep. Sarah helped when she could, but she was also managing the household and caring for the younger children while Mara worked. The strain was showing on all of them. Caleb had nightmares about men coming to take the house. Beth started wetting the bed again, something she hadn't done since she was 3. Thomas grew withdrawn and anxious. Even Ada seemed to sense the tension, fussing more than usual. One evening in late June, with the payment deadline looming just 2 weeks away, Mara sat calculating again and realized they were still $8 short. $8 that might as well have been $800. She'd sold everything she could sell, worked every job she could find, extracted every fossil from the ridge that was accessible. They'd done everything possible, and it wasn't enough. "We're not going to make it," she said flatly, showing Gideon the numbers. "Even if we go without food for 2 weeks, even if we sell buck, which would cripple us, we can't get there." Gideon stared at the paper, his face grim. "Then we tell Blackwell the truth. We've made good faith efforts. We've paid more than half. Maybe he'll—" "He won't. You heard him. One missed payment, and they foreclose immediately." "Then what do you suggest?" "I don't know." Mara's voice broke. "I don't know. I've tried everything. We all have. And it's not enough." For the first time since this ordeal began, she felt true despair settling over her like a shroud. They had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, and it was going to fail anyway because $8 stood between them and survival. Sarah, who had been listening from the loft, climbed down and stood before them. "There's one thing we haven't tried." "What's that, sweetheart?" "We ask for help, real help, from the community." Sarah's young face was determined. "The Johnsons have been good to us, and there are others, families who knew Pa, who've been to church with us, who've seen how hard we're working. Maybe if they knew how close we were, if they knew we just needed a little help." "Sarah, we can't beg," Mara said gently. "It's not begging. It's asking neighbors to help neighbors. That's what people do out here. They help each other survive." Sarah's voice grew passionate. "Mrs. Johnson told me once that when they first came out here, they almost didn't make it through the first winter, but the community pitched in, brought food, helped repair their cabin, loaned them a cow until they could buy their own. She said prairie people understand that sometimes survival is a group effort." Mara looked at Gideon, who was considering Sarah's words carefully. "The girl might be right," he said slowly. "Prairie folk don't like banks. Don't like outsiders coming in and taking land from people who are trying. If we went to church on Sunday, spoke to people after the service, explained the situation, not begging, just laying out the facts, they might help. And if they don't, then we're no worse off than we are now." Gideon's face was determined. "But we have to try. We can't give up when we're this close." So on Sunday, they loaded all 7 children into the wagon. Gideon had managed to repair it using scrap wood from the collapsed chicken coop and rode to Ash Hollow for services. The little church was barely more than a one-room schoolhouse with a cross on the wall, and the congregation was sparse, maybe 20 families, but they were there, people who had chosen to make lives in this harsh land. After the service, as people gathered outside to socialize, Mara approached Mrs. Johnson first. The older woman had been kind from the start, and Mara hoped she might set the tone for others. "Mrs. Johnson, might I have a word?" "Of course, dear. How are those children of yours? I heard about the scarlet fever. Terrible thing." "They've recovered, thank God. But Mrs. Johnson, I need to be honest with you about our situation." Mara laid it out plainly. The debt, the payment due, how close they were to the amount, how far they still had to go. "We're not asking for charity. This is money we'll pay back. Every penny, as soon as we're able. But right now we're $8 short, and I don't know where else to turn." Mrs. Johnson listened carefully, her weathered face thoughtful. When Mara finished, the older woman turned to her husband and had a brief, quiet conversation. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather purse. "John and I can spare $2, she said, pressing coins into Mara's hand. "And before you protest, think of it as paying forward the help we received when we needed it. Someday, when you're on your feet, you'll help someone else." Tears sprang to Mara's eyes. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. Come on, let's talk to some other folks." What happened next was something Mara would remember for the rest of her life. Mrs. Johnson moved through the congregation like a general rallying troops, explaining the situation to family after family, and one by one, people contributed. 50 cents here, $1 there, once a glorious $2 from the blacksmith who said he'd seen how hard Gideon worked and wanted to help. By the time they loaded back into the wagon, Mara was holding $8.35, enough to make the payment with a tiny bit left over. The children were unusually quiet, awed by what they'd witnessed. "Are we going to be okay now?" Beth asked softly. "We're going to make this payment," Mara said carefully. That buys us another 3 months. And in those 3 months, we'll work even harder. And when the next payment comes due, we'll find a way to make that one too. Will we have to keep asking people for money? Thomas looked uncomfortable with the idea. No, this was a one-time emergency. From now on, we support ourselves. Mara's voice was firm. But we remember this kindness, and someday we pay it forward to someone else who needs help. When Cornelius Blackwell arrived on July 15th, precisely on time as Mara had expected, she was ready for him. The cabin was clean, the children were presentable, and $62 in coins and small bills sat on the table. Blackwell counted it carefully, made notations in his ledger, and provided a receipt. The next payment is due October 15th, same amount. I trust you'll be ready. We will be, Mara said, though she had no idea how. After he left, the relief in the cabin was palpable. They had won again, another reprieve, another 3 months. It wasn't security, but it was time. That evening, as Mara prepared supper, she felt Gideon's presence beside her at the fire. We did it, he said quietly. We did, but we've got to do it 2 more times this year, and then 4 times next year. The fight's not over. No, he agreed. But we're still standing. That counts for something. Mara looked around the cabin at the children, Sarah helping Ada take her first wobbly steps, Caleb teaching Matthew a card game, Beth and Lily singing quietly in the corner, Thomas reading from the Bible with growing confidence. They looked like a family. They felt like a family. It counts for everything, she said. That night, long after everyone else was asleep, Mara sat outside under the stars and allowed herself a moment of honest reflection. She had lied to keep these children. She had begged the community for money. She had worked herself to exhaustion and taught these young ones to do the same. She had compromised every principle of easy morality she'd once held dear. And yet, looking at the cabin where 7 children slept safely, she couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. Morality, she had learned, was complicated. Sometimes doing right meant doing wrong. Sometimes protecting innocence required sacrificing your own. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the scent of growing things. In 3 months, they'd face this battle again. And 3 months after that, and on until either the debt was satisfied or they finally, inevitably, fell short. But that was future worry. Tonight, they had won. Tonight, 7 children would wake in the morning secure in their home, together as a family. Tonight, that was enough. Mara touched the ring on her finger, her mother's ring, her widow's ring, her badge of love chosen rather than blood given, and made a silent promise to herself, to the children, to the vast, indifferent prairie that had somehow become home. Whatever it took, however long the fight, she would not surrender. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to give up now. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere on the ridge, an owl called, a sound both lonely and defiant, a declaration of existence against the dark, just like them. Still here, still fighting, still refusing to let the world break what they had built. Summer deepened into a rhythm of relentless work and small victories. The corn grew tall in the southern field, its green stalks reaching toward the burning sky. The garden Sarah and Mara had planted yielded tomatoes, squash, and beans that filled their table and their root cellar. The fossil hunting continued, bringing in a few dollars here and there, though the easiest specimens had already been claimed and now they had to search harder, dig deeper, risk more to find anything worth selling. Mara's hands, once soft from city life, became permanently roughened by work. Sarah grew taller, more capable, shouldering responsibilities that would have broken most 12-year-olds. The younger children learned to contribute in whatever ways they could. Thomas became adept at fishing in the creek. Beth proved surprisingly skilled at vegetable gardening. Matthew helped Caleb tend the slowly rebuilding chicken flock. Even Ada, now nearly a year old, seemed to understand that this family operated on cooperation and love. She took her first real steps in August, toddling from Lily's arms to Mara's with a squeal of delight that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Gideon became a fixture rather than a temporary presence. He stopped sleeping in the corner with his escape always planned, and instead built himself a small lean-to attached to the barn, where he could have privacy without feeling like he was abandoning the family. He took day labor wherever he could find it, brought home his wages faithfully, and slowly, so slowly Mara almost didn't notice, began to smile occasionally. But the shadow of October 15th loomed over everything. They needed another $62, and despite their best efforts, by late September they had only $43 saved. The gap felt insurmountable. Then, on the last Sunday in September, after church services, a man Mara didn't recognize approached her. He was well-dressed, but not ostentatiously so, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Mrs. Hale? I'm Daniel Cartwright. I teach at the University in Omaha, geology and paleontology. Your fossils have been coming to my attention through Mr. Henderson, the dealer in North Platte." Mara's heart quickened. "Have we done something wrong? The specimens are genuine, I assure you." No, nothing like that," Cartwright smiled. "Quite the opposite. The quality of your finds has been remarkable. The ammonite you sent last month was particularly fine, one of the best preserved I've seen from this region. I've come to ask if I might visit your property and examine the site myself. If the deposit is as rich as your specimens suggest, I'd like to negotiate exclusive collecting rights." Exclusive rights? Mara was unfamiliar with the term. "I would pay you a monthly stipend, say $15, for the right to collect fossils from your ridge. Any significant finds would be additional compensation. It would give you steady income and give me access to what appears to be a scientifically valuable site." $15 a month. Mara's mind raced through the calculations. That would cover a quarter of each payment to the bank, with money left over for necessities. It wouldn't solve everything, but it would make survival possible rather than desperate. "When would you like to see the ridge?" she asked. "Today, if possible. I've come all the way from Omaha, and I'd like to examine the site while I'm here." Mara agreed immediately, and after delegating child-watching duties to Sarah, she and Gideon led Cartwright up to the ridge. The professor examined the limestone formations with the reverence of someone encountering sacred ground. He chipped carefully at exposed faces, exclaimed over the variety of specimens visible, and took copious notes in a leather journal. "This is extraordinary," he said finally. "This entire ridge was once the bottom of a shallow sea, millions of years ago. The fossil record here could help us understand ancient marine ecosystems. Mrs. Hale, I'd like to make you an offer. $20 a month for collecting rights, with a bonus of $5 to $50 for any exceptional specimens I find. The contract would run for 1 year initially, renewable if both parties are satisfied." $20 a month. Mara felt dizzy with relief. "That's very generous, Professor. It's fair compensation for access to valuable scientific resources. Do we have an agreement?" They shook hands on it, and Cartwright promised to send the formal contract within the week. As they walked back down to the cabin, Gideon was grinning. Actually grinning, something Mara had seen perhaps twice in 5 months. $20 a month, he said. "That changes everything." "It means we can make the payments," Mara agreed. "It means we might actually survive this." It means more than that." Gideon stopped walking and turned to face her. "It means you did it. You came here with nothing, and you've built something real. Those kids have a home because you refused to quit." "We did it," Mara corrected, "all of us together." But even as the fossil contract eased their financial strain, autumn brought new challenges. The first frost came early, blackening the last of the garden vegetables. Buck's limp returned, worse than before, and the veterinarian who examined him delivered grim news. The horse was old and wearing out. He might last another year, maybe 2, but they should start planning for his replacement, which meant finding money for a new horse eventually. Then, in early October, a week before their second payment was due, the county clerk Turnbull appeared at their door with news that made Mara's blood run cold. "Mrs. Hale, we have a problem. I've received an inquiry from the Territorial Records Office. They're auditing marriage certificates and they've flagged yours, or rather, the absence of yours, as irregular." Mara's mouth went dry. "I explained that the circuit preacher hasn't filed the paperwork yet." "I know, and I've been lenient about that explanation, but now the records office is involved and they want proof. They're sending an inspector next month to investigate the situation. If you can't produce a marriage certificate or the preacher who performed the ceremony, they may declare your marriage invalid." "Which would mean what, exactly?" which would mean you'd have no legal standing as Silas Hale's widow. You couldn't inherit the property, manage the estate, or serve as guardian to the children. They'd become wards of the county, likely separated and placed in different homes or institutions. After Turnbull left, Mara sat at the table with her head in her hands. Everything they'd built was about to collapse because of a lie told in desperation. The children, sensing something was terribly wrong, gathered around her silently. "Are they going to take us away?" Beth asked in a small voice. "No," Mara said with more conviction than she felt. "We'll find a way." That night, after the children were finally asleep, she and Gideon sat by the fire trying to solve the unsolvable. "We could run," Gideon suggested without conviction. "Take the kids, head west, start over somewhere they won't find us. With what money? What resources? And we'd always be running, always looking over our shoulders. That's no life for them." Mara stared into the flames. "There has to be another way." "The only way I can see is to produce an actual marriage certificate. And since we don't have one, that means we'd have to forge one." Mara finished the thought. "That's more than fraud, Gideon. That's a serious crime." "So is what we've already done, technically. We've been lying for months about a marriage that never happened." "I know, but at least that was just words. A forged document. If we're caught, it's prison. And then what happens to the children?" They sat in heavy silence, trapped between impossible choices. Then Gideon said quietly, "There might be one other option. It's crazy, but it might work." "Tell me. What if we actually got married, you and me? Real marriage, real certificate, properly filed. Then you'd legitimately be a widow's, well, a wife to Silas's brother, family. You'd have legal standing to care for the kids as their aunt by marriage." Mara stared at him. That would solve the legal problem. But Gideon, we barely know each other. Marriage is a piece of paper that would keep those 7 children together and in their home. That's what it would be. Nothing more, nothing less. We're already living here, already working together, already raising them as a team. This would just make it legal. You'd do that? Tie yourself to this mess permanently? I'm already tied to it. I stopped running, remember? Those kids, they're my blood. He paused, searching for words. "You're the best thing that's happened to this family since Ruth died. If marrying you means keeping everyone together, then that's what we do." Mara's mind reeled. Marriage to Gideon Hale. A marriage of convenience, a legal maneuver to protect children. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd left Philadelphia dreaming of a new life. But then, nothing about this journey had been what she'd imagined. "It would have to be real," she said slowly. "No deception this time. Real ceremony, real certificate, properly filed. We'd be legally married." "I understand. And what about, would you expect—" Mara felt her face flush. "Would this be a real marriage in all ways?" "That would be up to you." Gideon's voice was gentle. "I'm not asking for more than you're willing to give. We could keep separate sleeping arrangements, live as partners in running this household. Or if over time you wanted something more, I wouldn't object. But there'd be no pressure, no expectations beyond what we've already been doing." It was perhaps the strangest proposal in the history of proposals, practical, honest, and offered with no pretense of romance. And yet Mara realized it was also the most real thing anyone had ever offered her. Not pretty lies or empty promises, but a genuine partnership built on shared purpose and mutual respect. "All right," she said. "Let's do it." They were married the following Sunday by the same preacher who held services in the little church. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, with the 7 children as witnesses and the Johnson family there for support. Mara wore her best dress, the same navy blue she'd worn the day she arrived. Gideon wore clean clothes and looked uncomfortable but determined. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Gideon gave her a chaste kiss on the cheek that made the children giggle. Then they signed the certificate, filed it properly with the county clerk, and returned home as Mr. and Mrs. Gideon Hale, legal guardians of 7 children, legal owners, pending debt satisfaction, of 160 acres of Nebraska prairie. "Well," Gideon said as they stood in the cabin that evening, newly married and uncertain what came next. "That's done." "Yes," Mara agreed. "Now we just have to make it work." We've been making it work for 6 months. This just makes it official." He was right. Nothing had really changed except the paperwork. They still had the same struggles, the same children to feed, the same debt to satisfy. But now they had legal standing to fight for it all. The inspector from the Territorial Records Office arrived 3 weeks later, examined their marriage certificate with suspicious thoroughness, interviewed the children and several neighbors, and finally declared himself satisfied that the marriage was legitimate and that the children were being properly cared for. There was some question about Mrs. Hale's first marriage to the deceased, he noted, but since she's now properly married to the deceased's brother, it's moot. The children are with family. That satisfies the county's concerns. After he left, Sarah hugged Mara so hard she could barely breathe. "You did it. You really did it. You found a way." "We all did it," Mara said, including the other children in her gaze. "Every single one of us fought for this family." October's payment was made on time with money from their savings, Gideon's wages, and the first stipend from Professor Cartwright. They had $18 left over, more than they'd had at any point since Mara arrived. Winter came hard that year, but they were prepared. The root cellar was stocked with vegetables from the garden. They'd slaughtered and preserved 2 chickens, bought a young pig that Gideon was fattening for butchering in December. Firewood was stacked high against the cabin wall. Blankets had been mended and layered. The paper windows had been replaced with real glass that Mara had purchased with her laundry money. On Christmas morning, Mara woke to find that Gideon had carved small toys for each child: a doll for Beth, a whistle for Matthew, a top for Thomas. Sarah received a real sewing kit with quality needles and thread. Caleb got a pocket knife. Lily received a cloth book that Mara had made, filled with pictures and simple words. Ada got a wooden rattle that made her squeal with delight. "How did you afford all this?" Mara asked, astonished. "I didn't. I made it. Spent evenings in this barn carving after everyone was asleep." Gideon looked almost embarrassed. "Figured the kids deserved something for Christmas after the year they've had." The children were ecstatic, playing with their gifts and thantering excitedly. Even more precious was the dinner Mara had prepared: roasted pork, potatoes, the last of the squash baked with butter and salt, and a pie made from preserved apples. It was a feast compared to their usual fare. After dinner, as the children played by the fire and Gideon read to them from the Bible, Mara stepped outside into the cold. Snow had fallen the night before, blanketing everything in pristine white. The prairie stretched endlessly, beautiful in its winter severity. She had been on this land for 8 months. 8 months of struggle and fear and desperate improvisation. 8 months of learning to love children who weren't hers by blood, but were hers in every way that mattered. 8 months of partnership with a man she'd married twice, once in fiction, once in fact, and was slowly coming to respect and even care for deeply. It hadn't been the life she'd imagined when she'd boarded that train in Philadelphia. It had been harder, stranger, more morally complicated than anything she could have predicted. But standing here, listening to the sound of children's laughter drifting from the cabin, she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. "You'll freeze out here." She turned to find Gideon had joined her, bringing a blanket that he draped over her shoulders. "Just thinking," she said. "About what?" "About how far we've come. About everything we've survived." She looked at him. "About how this marriage we entered for purely practical reasons might actually become something real, given time." Gideon was quiet for a moment, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I'd like that," he said finally. "I didn't think I would. Didn't think I had it in me after everything. But you've reminded me that family isn't just about blood or romantic love. It's about choosing to show up every day, choosing to fight for each other." "We chose well then," Mara said softly. "Yeah, we did." They stood together in the snow, 2 people who'd found each other through the most unlikely circumstances, and Mara felt something shift inside her. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of love. The beginning of something that might grow into genuine partnership and affection if they both tended it carefully. From inside, Beth called, "Uncle Gideon, Mama Mara, come see what Ada's doing." Mama Mara. The name had evolved gradually over the months, first just Miss Mara, then occasionally Mama Mara, from the youngest children, and now it seemed to have stuck. Mara hadn't asked them to call her that, hadn't pushed for it, but hearing it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket around her shoulders. "Coming," she called back. They returned to the cabin where Ada was indeed doing something worth seeing, taking several unsteady steps across the floor before collapsing into Caleb's waiting arms with delighted giggles. The family cheered, and Mara joined them by the fire, Gideon settling beside her in a way that felt natural now. The months that followed were not easy. Nothing about frontier life was easy. But they were possible. In January, they made their third payment to the bank. In April, the fourth. Professor Cartwright returned in spring to begin serious excavation of the ridge, and was so pleased with his findings that he increased their monthly stipend to $25 and paid a $100 bonus for an exceptionally rare specimen of an ancient marine reptile. The $100 allowed them to pay off the doctor's bill, buy a young horse to eventually replace Buck, purchase seed for expanded planting, and put aside a small emergency fund. For the first time since Mara had arrived, they weren't living day to day, but could actually plan for a future. By summer, the farm was beginning to thrive. The fields produced a good harvest. The garden exploded with vegetables. The pig had multiplied into 3 pigs. The chicken flock numbered a dozen. They had 2 horses now, which meant both Mara and Gideon could take outside work when needed. The children were thriving too. Sarah, now 13, had grown into a capable young woman who ran the household with efficiency when Mara was working. Caleb, 11, was becoming an accomplished farmer under Gideon's tutelage. Thomas had overcome his shyness and become the family's designated town-goer, charming the shopkeepers and always bringing back small treats for his siblings. Beth and Matthew were inseparable, always creating elaborate games and stories. Lily had revealed a beautiful singing voice and entertained them nightly. And Ada was walking steadily now, talking in simple sentences, and calling Mara Mama without any qualifier. In October, when they made their final payment for the second year, Cornelius Blackwell actually smiled, a thin, professional smile, but still. "Mrs. Hale, I must say, when I first came here, I gave you very little chance of success. Yet you've met every payment, improved the property, and created what appears to be a stable household. The bank has noted your reliability." "Does that mean anything for future payments?" Gideon asked. "It means that after next year's payments are completed, the bank would be willing to restructure the remaining debt into a standard mortgage with more favorable terms, lower monthly payments over a longer period. You've proven yourselves to be responsible borrowers." After Blackwell left, Mara and Gideon looked at each other and burst out laughing, slightly hysterical laughter born of relief and disbelief. "We did it," Mara said. Mara. "We actually did it. We're going to keep the farm." "Never doubted it for a second," Gideon lied, and they laughed again. That evening, Mara gathered all the children for a family meeting. They sat around the table, which Gideon had expanded to accommodate everyone, and she looked at each of their faces, these 7 souls she'd fought so hard to keep together. "I want you all to understand something," she said. "When I came here 18 months ago, I was running away from an empty life. I had no family, no purpose, no hope. Your father's letter gave me a chance at all of those things, even though he died before I could meet him. But what I've found here, what we've built together, it's more than I ever dreamed of having." "Are you saying you're glad Pa died?" Thomas asked, confused. "No, sweetheart. I'm saying I'm sorry I never got to meet him, but I'm grateful for what his death brought me, all of you. And I want you to know that you're not obligations or burdens or children I'm stuck with. You're my family, by choice, by love, by everything that matters. I chose you, and I'd choose you again every single day." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "We chose you too, Mama Mara. Even when we didn't know what we were choosing, even when we were scared, we chose right." "Yeah," Caleb added quietly, "you're our real mama now, the mama who stayed." Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. Even Ada, not fully understanding but sensing the emotion, reached her small arms toward Mara and said clearly, "Mama." That night, after the children were asleep, Mara sat outside as had become her habit. Gideon joined her, bringing 2 cups of actual coffee, a luxury they could occasionally afford now. "Next spring," he said, "we should plant fruit trees, maybe build a proper hen house, expand the barn. This place could be really something in a few years." "We could get a cow," Mara suggested. Fresh milk would be good for the children. And maybe, Gideon paused, seeming uncertain, maybe we could think about adding a proper bedroom onto the cabin so the kids could have the loft and we could have some privacy. Mara looked at him, understanding what he was really asking. Their marriage had remained platonic this year, two partners sharing space but not intimacy. But something had been growing between them, respect deepening into friendship, friendship warming into affection. "I'd like that," she said softly. "The bedroom, and whatever else comes with it." Gideon reached over and took her hand, scarred and calloused, just like his. "We've got time. No rush. But I wanted you to know, this thing we have, this partnership, it's becoming more than convenience for me. You're becoming more." "For me too," Mara admitted. "I didn't expect it, but I'm not sorry for it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, looking out at the prairie that had tested them so thoroughly and which they had somehow survived. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, but Mara no longer found them cold. Instead, they seemed like witnesses to human persistence, to love's ability to grow in the harshest soil. Years later, 3 years to be exact, Mara stood in almost the same spot, but everything had changed. The cabin now had 2 proper bedrooms, a real floor, and glass windows throughout. The barn had been rebuilt and expanded. The fields stretched green and productive. Fruit trees, still young but promising, lined the southern boundary. A dozen chickens pecked contentedly in their secure coop. A cow named Daisy grazed with her calf. 2 pigs rooted in their pen. And in the yard, 9 children played. 9, because in addition to the original 7, there were now 2 more. A baby boy born 8 months ago, whom they'd named Silas after the brother who'd brought Mara here, and a 5-year-old girl they'd taken in when her parents died of influenza the previous winter. The county had asked if they'd consider fostering her, knowing the Hales' reputation for caring for children, and Mara hadn't been able to say no. Sarah, now 16, was being courted by the Johnsons' eldest son, a good boy with farming ambitions. Caleb had shot up tall and was Gideon's right hand with the farm work. The younger children had grown and thrived, each developing their own personalities and talents. The debt to the bank had been fully satisfied the previous spring. The farm was theirs, clear and free. Professor Cartwright's fossil excavations continued, providing steady supplemental income. Mara's laundry and mending business had evolved into something more. She now taught other women frontier skills and served as an informal midwife for the community, knowledge gained from helping deliver 3 babies in the past 2 years. But more than the physical changes, more than the financial security, what had transformed most was Mara herself. She was no longer the frightened woman who'd stepped off that train with 2 trunks and a letter promising a marriage that never happened. She was Mara Hale, wife, mother, farmer, midwife, teacher, survivor. She was necessary. She was loved. She was home. Gideon came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him with the easy comfort of a real marriage, a real partnership that had grown into genuine love. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About that first day, when Caleb met me at the station and told me Silas was dead. I was so lost, so terrified. I had no idea what I was doing. And now I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm building a life. I'm raising a family. I'm keeping promises." She turned in his arms to face him. "I'm loving you." "I love you too," Gideon said, and kissed her. Not the chaste kiss of their practical wedding, but the deep kiss of a husband who truly cherished his wife. From the yard, one of the children called, probably Beth, who was now 9 and had appointed herself the family's social coordinator, announcing that supper was ready. The family gathered, all 9 children plus Mara and Gideon, around the expanded table in a cabin that was now unquestionably a home. Before they ate, Mara asked them to join hands for grace. But instead of a formal prayer, she said simply, "Thank you for this family. Thank you for second chances. Thank you for teaching us that love chosen is stronger than blood, and that a home is built not with wood and nails, but with sacrifice, persistence, and the refusal to give up on each other." "Amen," the children chorused. As they ate, the food plentiful, the conversation lively, the laughter genuine, Mara looked around the table and felt something close to perfect contentment. This life hadn't been given to her. She'd fought for it, lied for it, worked herself to exhaustion for it, compromised her principles and rebuilt them stronger for it. And it had been worth every single struggle. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Mara took out the old ledger that had belonged to Silas, the one Gideon had shown her that first terrible week, with Silas's note saying to let her keep the house and raise the children if she chose. On the last page, in careful script, she wrote, "Love chosen is stronger than blood. This house stands because we stayed. The children thrive because we fought. The family endures because we refused to let hardship break what we built together. Silas Hale's letter brought me here, but it was the children, and eventually Gideon, who made me stay. This is my testimony. A woman who came west for a husband she never met found instead a family worth dying for, worth living for, worth everything. We survived. We thrived. We won." Mara Hale, October 1890. She closed the ledger and placed it on the shelf where it would remain, a record for future generations of how this family had been forged in fire and desperation and had emerged stronger than steel. Outside, the prairie wind sang through the grass as it always did, eternal, indifferent, wild. But inside the cabin, warmth and love, and the gentle sounds of a family sleeping peacefully. A family that had nearly been lost, nearly been scattered, nearly been destroyed. But they had stayed. Through lies and truth, through sickness and health, through poverty and the slow climb toward prosperity, through every challenge that prairie and circumstance could throw at them, they had stayed. And in the staying, they had become something more than the sum of their individual stories. They had become proof that family is not just born, but built. That home is not just found, but fought for. That love is not just felt, but chosen again and again in 1,000 small decisions to show up, to persist, to refuse surrender. The widow's promise, made by a woman who had never been a wife until she became one twice over, who had never been a mother until she became mother to 7 and then 9, had been kept. They were together. They were home. They were safe. And that was everything.